Chapter 1465. You, what are you doing? Don't scare me. I'm very timid. I usually scream when I see a cockroach. The fisherwoman was confused by Yangxi's action, but she knew how difficult Yangxi was to deal with. She dared not offend him. Seeing the fisherwoman's reaction, the salted fishes wished they could climb into the screen and accept Yangxi's bow for her. They had been following the live stream for so many years, but when had they ever seen Yangxi like this? Hen Shengzao. Don't be stunned, give me some reaction. Little Rongrong is thanking you. Zijuyue. This is a once-in-a-thousand-years opportunity. Show me your mountain ghost character. Don't be a coward. Yanhuang Huatsua. Little Rongrong thinks you're an otherworldly master. Take the opportunity to show off. Big brother, you won't get another chance like this. The group of salted fishes were anxious in front of the screen, but more were envious and jealous. King Linkson. I'm willing to use more than 100 caddies of authentic streaky pork from 6 of my roommates in exchange for a dream of 1,000 years. Don't be unsatisfied. I'll make a wish too. I'm willing to use the keyboard that Tang Chi used to copy and paste in exchange for a dream of 1,000 years. The salted fishes cheered happily, while the fisherwoman clenched her fists nervously, not knowing how to react. I've offended you just now. Please forgive me, little lady. Yangxi said. This kindness is no different from the kindness of Huang Shigong in teaching me. Little lady. Even though she knew that little lady was a term for unmarried women in this era, the fisherwoman still blushed disappointingly. No, you don't have to apologize. I'm already very happy that you didn't kill me. The fisherwoman paused after saying that. She seemed to have thought of something as her eyes evaded. Then if you really want to thank me, can you help me fulfill 2 small wishes? The fisherwoman used her thumb and forefinger to make a short gesture, indicating that his wish was really not that great. Yangxi was not surprised. He said, as long as it's within my capabilities, and does not violate filial piety and benevolence, I will naturally do my best to help you fulfill your wishes. The fisherwoman said, can you let him call me little lady? He pointed at Liyun. Even though he was a man, it did not stop him from liking the little angel Han Mei. He was a veteran fan of Liyun's father's fan club. When Liyun got married, he even generously threw money at him. Yangxi. What kind of wish was that? Liyun was also confused. Was there a special title for little lady? Since it was just a greeting, Liyun naturally wouldn't reject it. When he said the 3 words little lady, with a slight accent, the fisherwoman felt that her heart was blessed by Cupid and Yu Lao at the same time. He wanted to climb the wall and jump ship from his father's fan club to his girlfriend's group. There was a video recording in the streaming room. When he returned, he wanted to cut off the little lady that Yangxi and Liyun were talking about and use it as his ringtone. Ahem! The second wish. The fisherwoman rubbed her hands nervously. Her flushed cheeks made Yangxi slightly suspicious. My second wish. Can I have your autographs? Yangxi raised his eyebrows and asked in confusion. Autograph? It's rare for me to come here, so I want to take something from my idol as a souvenir. The fisherwoman said pitifully. The mountain is very boring, and I can't stay in the human world for long. Do you know how rare it is for me to possess a body? Autograph as a souvenir. Yangxi was a little hesitant. He didn't know what she wanted to do with his autograph. If it was really a wild mountain spirit, Yangxi felt that it was somewhat unreliable based on the supernatural novels that he had read. On second thought, it wasn't hard to get their handwritten words. Yangxi had the habit of practicing calligraphy on a daily basis, so he didn't know how many useless manuscripts he had written. If this mountain spirit really had evil intentions, there were plenty of channels. There was no need to use such precious information as bait. In the blink of an eye, countless thoughts flew through his mind. After some consideration, Yangxi smiled and agreed. Although it was a personal autograph, Yangxi didn't write his name. Instead, he wrote a congratulatory message. He pretended to ask casually, "What's your name?" The fisherwoman subconsciously said her real name, but the system didn't allow it. After muting it, it turned into the ID of the streaming room. My name is Eating with Feet Buckled. Yangxi's hand paused, almost ruining the entire piece of paper. The fisherwoman also received the system's explanation. She suddenly had the urge to cry, but no tears came out. Damn it, of all the IDs, why did it have to be called eating with feet buckled? Great, how embarrassing. Li Yun's gaze also changed. He said in surprise, why is there such a strange name like eating with feet buckled? It was fine if it was strange, but the key was that it was very wretched. Imagine herself sitting in front of the dining table, eating with chopsticks in her right hand, and picking at her feet with her left. Her face instantly turned green. The fisherwoman wanted to cry, but no tears came out to cover up her lie. Mountain spirits are different from humans. Where we come from, we have names like being in love is better than being gay, and naughty 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 son. After all, it's a mountain spirit. You know, different customs and people are different. You have to understand. Yangtze looked at the mountain spirit with a honeyed and probing gaze. Even so, the fisherwoman still succeeded in getting the trio's autographs. Among the three of them, Yangtze's handwriting was the best. The fisherwoman couldn't tell what was so good about it. She only felt that the saying handwriting is like the person did not apply to Yangtze. Li Yun's handwriting was different from his temperament. Every stroke was free and unrestrained, while Qi Kuang was plain and ordinary. I want to frame them and pass them on to my future generations. Her only regret was that she couldn't get the others' autographs. It would have been great if he had transmigrated during the New Year's banquet. Most of the streamer's staff would have gathered, and she could have completed the entire illustrated handbook achievement in one go. Just as the fisherwoman finished speaking, the boats in front suddenly raised their guard. Yangtze's expression turned cold and he said, "They're here." The fisherwoman didn't know when they had arrived. After a while, she saw a dense group of unfamiliar boats approaching from the end of the river. The people on the boats looked fierce, and she immediately had an ominous premonition. Li Yun told her to hide in the cabin. The water bandits were unreasonable existences. It wouldn't be good to accidentally injure him. There won't be any danger, right? The fisherwoman asked Li Yun nervously. Li Yun said, "They're just some water bandits." Because of Yangtze's arrangements, the water bandits knew that this was a big deal. Almost all the young and strong men of the water bandits were mobilized. There were more than 1,000 of them. Water bandits of this scale were considered above average among the water bandits, but 100,000 dawn of rations was worth mobilizing such a large force. Yangtze said, "Send someone to negotiate with them and test out their strength." To the outside world, the fleet was disguised as a merchant caravan. The people standing on the deck were either rough men in plain clothes or elderly boatmen. Although there were a few armed servants on the outer boats, they posed no threat to the water bandits. The water bandits said, "We don't want your lives, we only want your money. If you know what's good for you, leave your money and leave." Chapter 1466. Why would the water bandits agree? Wasn't the 100,000 dawn of rations transported to Zhangzhou to make a fortune? These unscrupulous merchants were willing to do anything in order to earn blood money. Instead of letting them harm the people with the rations, they might as well rob them to feed the thousands of brothers in the village. If they had not been well informed, suppressing the news and acting secretly, such a fat sheep would have been snatched away by someone else. Yangtze stood on the deck, waiting for the other party's reply. The water bandits' ships had already surrounded the fleet. The fisherwoman stuck her head out curiously and looked around. With the good vision of this body, she could see the figures of the water bandits in the distance. Usually, she watched the live stream through the screen, so no matter how bloody the scene was, she could get used to it. Now that she was in the flesh, she panicked. To ease her nervousness and fear, the fisherwoman could only force herself to focus on the bullet screen. Because the fisherwoman had not transmigrated for a long time, everyone did not know that Yangtze was enforcing the law. Instead, they thought that Yangtze and the others were escorting rations to the front line. They did not expect to meet water bandits along the way and face the predicament of being robbed. Tuda Faccio. We're done for. They're not friendly. The food transport fleet did not bring many soldiers. We're going to be robbed. Deng Hai Kwangma. It's fine if the rations are lost, but the people can't be harmed. Fireworks era. This is strange. Why do you think that the people in the cabin are rations and not people? Countless bullet-screen comments flew by. The fisherwoman became more anxious the more she read. When she transmigrated, she was in the cabin. There were only about 10 guards, and the rest were sacks of rations. It was obvious that the other ships were in the same situation. The entire fleet probably did not have as many people as the water bandits. If they fought, they would lose. The fisherwoman bit her lip secretly, not knowing that the situation outside had changed again and again. The fleet deliberately showed weakness to encourage the water bandits, giving them the illusion that the fleet had more rations than people, so they were not a threat. Leader, don't talk nonsense with them. We can't afford to waste time. A small leader of the water bandits said. We're too big of a target. If we attract the attention of the nearby villages, it'll be difficult for us to take everything for ourselves. Why don't we try boarding the ship and see what's real? The leader of the pirates also thought the same. The longer this dragged on, the more trouble there would be. He immediately ordered his minions to approach the ships on the periphery and force their way onto the decks to rush into the cabins. The cabins were filled with bags of food. The lackeys were very arrogant. They kicked the guards who tried to resist into the water and shouted, "Boss, it's all food." The surrounding boats were all in the same situation. The leader of the pirates immediately gave the order. Seeing this, the corners of Yangtze's lips curled up into a cold smile. The fisherwoman accidentally saw it, and she shuddered involuntarily. From the beginning to the end, Yangtze did not show any signs of panic or confusion. He should have known that he had a card up his sleeve. They're coming. The fisherwoman saw the ferocious water bandits board the deck, and her heart beat like thunder. Her hands and feet became ice cold, and her face was completely drained of blood. Li Yin stood at the side and said in a deep voice, "Don't panic. Just watch." The fisherwoman could not help but widen her eyes as she saw a scene that she would never forget for the rest of her life. The water bandits discovered that the ships on the periphery were all loaded with food. In a moment of excitement, their wariness was greatly reduced, and they did not discover the hidden danger. When the water bandits boarded the deck and entered the cabins, what they saw was not food, but a butcher's knife that had been waiting for them for a long time. Screams rose and fell. Before long, corpses fell into the water like dumplings, instantly dyeing the water red. Before the water bandits could react, Yangtze ordered the boats to change positions and blocked their path, wrapping them up like dumplings. The water bandits were caught off guard. They had no way of putting up any effective resistance, and were instead slaughtered. They could not defeat the enemy, and there was no way to escape with their boats. Left with no choice, many of the water bandits chose to jump into the water. They had been around water since they were young, and were very good swimmers. But Yangtze did not plan on letting them go. Rows of archers shot arrows into the water. The fisherwoman witnessed all of this with her own eyes. The corpses on the water surface sank and floated up again. Fresh blood dyed the blue water scarlet. She was in a daze and did not notice that a water bandit had climbed onto the boat to launch a sneak attack. When Li Yin chopped the man into two, fresh blood sprayed all over his face, and the water bandit's head rolled in front of him. Only then did the fisherwoman react. She screamed in fright. This was definitely not a good experience for the fisherwoman. He lived in a harmonious society, where firearms were controlled. The bloodiest scene he had seen since he was young was when the husband of his neighbor in the countryside abused his wife, beating her until her face was swollen, and her nose was black and blue as she wailed and screamed. To him, this was an extremely deep psychological trauma. He did not expect that after transmigrating, he would witness so many living people dying in front of his eyes. The fisherwoman was so frightened that tears flowed from her eyes, giving Li Yin a fright. As it was a fishing operation, the water bandits were caught off guard. Yangtze did not have to pay much to obtain a great victory. Yangtze said, "Interrogate them properly. If they are willing to work for us, spare their lives. If they can't, deal with them." Most of the water bandits were tough on the outside but weak on the inside. They were not hard to deal with, and could be subdued with a little effort. Yangtze was not very worried. On the contrary, the man who called himself Mountain Ghost was crying very miserably. His courage was even smaller than his daughter, who was not even 1 year old. "Why are you crying?" Yangtze asked him. The fisherwoman took a while to recover. Her hands and legs were weak. Dead people. The fisherwoman did not know if she was lucky or unlucky. Not only did she meet Li Yin and the rest, but she also received their autographs and blessings. It should have been a good thing, but she did not expect so many water bandits to jump out in the next second and put on a one-sided massacre in front of her. Yang Si said coldly, "In troubled times, there are no places where people don't die." The fisherwoman had heard similar words from others when she watched the live stream. At that time, she felt it was rather cool, but now she felt exceptionally sorrowful. I thought killing people was against the law." Yang Si sneered. "That was during the Golden Age. In Golden Age, killing people is against the law. In troubled times, human life is less than grass." His observational skills were meticulous, and he could more or less see some clues. Even though he did not know where mountain ghosts came from, he did not look like an evil person. His living environment should be very simple. The fisherwoman held back her tears. At the same time, she felt a little fortunate. Fortunate that she had only transmigrated for 12 hours. Fortunate that there was no war in the era she lived in. For some unknown reason, he seized the time to tell Qi Kuang, and the rest what he felt would be useful. Qi Kuang listened attentively. Unknowingly, the moon and stars filled the sky outside. "I've never seen such a beautiful starry sky." The fisherwoman sat on the deck and supported her body with her hands. She sighed with emotion. The system reminded her that the countdown had begun. Yang Si suddenly asked, "Since you're a mountain ghost, you can reach the heavens and the earth. Do you know if my master has any hope of attaining the throne?" The fisherwoman was lamenting the short time. When she heard this, she subconsciously retorted, "Besides her, who else could it be?" Chapter 1467. Seeing that Yang Si was rooted to the ground, the fisherwoman walked forward with a grin. She placed one hand on her waist and patted Yang Si's shoulder with the other. "Your master, my lord, is not an ordinary person. It's impossible for her to lose." She almost said the word streamer, but the fisherwoman stopped herself in time and changed her words. She was a big shot in the future world after all. If Jiang Pengji lost in a situation where she had the upper hand, wouldn't her reputation be undeserved? Yang Si didn't mind her actions and asked, "Is it destiny?" The fisherwoman wanted to agree, but he seemed to have thought of something. He shook his head and denied it, scaring Li Yin and Qi Kuang into silence. What did mountain ghosts mean? Don't you think it's unfair to her and the souls of the heroes who died in battle to ascribe her merits all these years, and the achievements of the soldiers who died along the way to the word destiny? The fisherwoman said, "At the end of the day, didn't all of this come from your lord and all of you? The word fate, as light as a feather, can't give such a heavy fruit." The fisherwoman didn't know how to express her meaning. She scratched her head in distress. "If I studied hard for more than 10 years before I was admitted to the best school, and some idiot jumped out and told me that I was able to get in because he helped me with a prayer ritual, abruptly depriving me of more than 10 years of hard work, I would definitely jump up and smash the other party's head. Rather than saying it's destiny, it's better to say everything depends on human effort and the will of the people. I believe that your lord will stand until the end." Yang Si's brows relaxed, and he revealed a smile without any malice. He understood what the fisherwoman was trying to express. "Thank you." After Yang Si finished speaking, the fisherwoman realized that there was only half a minute left. She suddenly became bold. It was rare for her to transmigrate. Wouldn't it be a pity if she didn't hug her idol? Li Yin was a general, so it wasn't easy to ambush him. In comparison, it was much easier for Yang Si. The fisherwoman spoke quickly. "Little Rongrong catch." The fisherwoman called Yang Si Rongrong. But Yang Si didn't know who Rongrong was, so he was a little confused. Before he could react, the fisherwoman had already spread open her arms and pounced forward, giving him a huge bear hug. Her actions were frighteningly rash. Seeing that Yang Si was about to be thrown off the deck, Li Yin hurriedly stepped forward to pull the two of them, to prevent them from falling into the water. Yang Si was still in a state of shock, but Li Yin was surprised to find that the lively fisherwoman had collapsed to the ground. Squatting down to check, he said, "Counselor, she's unconscious." Yangtze tidied up his messy clothes, and there was still a look of shock on his face. What? Fainted? After more than an hour, the fisherwoman woke up again. Her words and actions were completely different from before, and she trembled as she faced Yangtze and the others. Li Yun and the other two looked at each other. Yangtze did not believe in heresy and tried again and again, but the result was disappointing. Qi Kuang silently counted the time and said softly, "It's been 12 hours." Li Yun also reacted and said in shock, "Could it be that she's really a mountain ghost?" Yangtze said, "Whether it's real or fake, it should be harmless to us." If it wasn't for the scary bear hug at the end, Yangtze's impression of the fisherwoman would have been higher. Qi Kuang carefully noticed something and said, "The piece of paper that was written to the mountain ghost just now is missing." He saw with his own eyes that the mountain ghost folded the letter and stuffed it at her waist. After a moment of confusion, it actually disappeared without a trace. Of course it was missing. According to the rules of Dream of 1,000 Years, that piece of paper was a gift from Yangtze and the others to the lucky emperor, so it could be taken away. What was the lucky emperor doing now? He was excitedly holding his camera and taking pictures of the autograph. He took every inch of the autograph and posted it on the popular thread of the Empress's live streaming forum to show off. Ever since the first lucky emperor, Night Dance and Flame Spirit, started a thread before he transmigrated, the next few lucky emperors continued this tradition and enjoyed the worship of the unlucky emperors. It was just that the identities of the lucky emperors who transmigrated were different. Most of them returned empty-handed and couldn't show off their spoils of war, even if they wanted to. Wonderful, wonderful. While humming a tune, Eating with his feet buckled up the recording of today's live broadcast. He skillfully cut off Little Lady as his ringtone, and then took a screenshot of himself, hugging Yangtze as his boot screensaver. He planned to make a new set tomorrow. Ding dong, ding dong. The private messages on the forum were endless. He casually clicked on a few, and found that many people wanted to buy his autograph. Some even offered 1,000,000 yuan. The lucky emperor rejected them happily. "I'm not selling. I'm taking it as a family heirloom." As a rich and European tycoon, did he lack that little bit of money? Because this round of Dream of 1,000 Years had ended, Jiang Pingji naturally couldn't continue to monitor Yangtze's situation. Whether it was her or the lucky emperor himself, neither of them had expected Yangtze to suddenly cause such a major incident. What big event was it? Naturally, it was to completely nail the ID eating rice with feet buckled into the history books and publicize the execution. The history books of later generations would truthfully record this experience in the history books. The source of the material was Yangtze. On a certain day in a certain year, the wind was gentle and the sky was clear. Taizu dispatched troops to fight with Marquis Zhongyong in Zhangzhou. Marquis Wujing Yangtze devised a plan to capture the water bandits. The mountain ghost descended and taught him the divine art of shipbuilding. It was called eating rice with feet buckled. Before he left, he even said, "Taizu, it's your destiny." The most indecent name in this period of history was the name Mountain Ghost. No matter how one looked at it, it seemed like a weird idea on the internet. Yangtze's original intention was to use the identity of Mountain Ghost to prove that Jiang Pingji was the Emperor of Heaven's destiny and attacked the enemy's reputation. However, Jiang Pingji saw the pitiful idea of Mountain Ghost go down in history. She didn't know whether she should feel sorry for it or not. Not only was eating rice with feet buckled, but Mountain Ghost's nonsense gay is better than love and coward were also publicly executed. Regarding this, the feelings of countless college entrance examination students in the future were quite unified. The ancients were really king good at having fun. Their names were like internet usernames. They all felt that it was so dirty. Why would the ancients write them down in the history books with a calm expression? Why would the teachers who wrote the test papers make them into exam questions with a straight face? Wouldn't they be unable to hold back their laughter when the test papers were published? Mountain Ghost was a proper mountain ghost, but it was a pity that the name was not a proper one. This matter was also a story for a long time in the future. Yangtze had the intention to expose the fact that Mountain Ghost conveyed the destiny of heaven to build momentum for his lord. Although he was not as proficient in public opinion as Wei Ci, he had learned a little from what he saw and heard. Li Yin said, "No wonder the military counselor asked Mountain Ghost that question back then. If her answer is not to your liking," Yang Si said coldly. "If it's not to your liking, why keep her alive?" Of course, it was to silence her. Any words and actions that were detrimental to the Lord, or the words of a spiritual monster like Mountain Ghost, must not be leaked. Li Yin pinched his chin and said, "Will outsiders believe it?" Yang Si did not panic at all. "Do you know what 3 men will become a tiger, and the public's mouth can melt gold means? As long as there were more people who said it, there would naturally be ignorant people who would believe it. When there were more ignorant people who believed it, the false would become true." Chapter 1468. The pirates weren't as tight-lipped as expected. Instead, they were much more relaxed. They confessed after a few rounds of torture. Li Yin asked, "What do you plan to do? Take down the pirates one by one?" Yang Si replied, "What else? Yang Tao's troops don't care about this area at all. We can take the opportunity to catch more pirates. First, we can familiarize ourselves with water battles. Second, we can familiarize ourselves with the environment. Third, we can make a name for ourselves. A while ago, we found out that many people still remember Yang Jian's kindness. With Yang Jian's death, Yang Tao's good reputation fell to him. Our army's reason for sending troops is a bit far-fetched. Even if we spread rumors that our lord is the son of destiny, the local people are still against us. Why don't we take the opportunity to do some good deeds and build up our connections?" Yang Si was a man of action. He would put his ideas into action if he had them. He planned to use the Mountain Ghost to build up Jiang Pingji's reputation. Naturally, he wouldn't drag things out. Instead, he chose to carry it out swiftly and decisively. Yang Si had people make up a nursery rhyme about the Mountain Ghost and let the street urchins and beggars spread it. In less than 3 days, the news had reached Yang Tao and the others. The ignorant people believed it, but Yang Tao and the others could tell that it was intentional. A psychological attack? Yan Lin laughed mockingly as he tossed the book aside. He didn't believe in the Son of Destiny at all. Since ancient times, how many emperors have pretended to be immortals to make themselves look good? Strange signs at birth and strange dreams of the mother were nothing more than lies used by the common people to deceive the ignorant. If he was really the Son of Heaven, why were there so many people who lived less than 100 years old? What live as long as the heavens and live 10,000 years? They were just bullsh*. Jiang Pingji agreed with Yan Lin's idea. In ancient times, this would be a myth. In the future, it would be a marketing, and a shameless brainwashing marketing at that. Qian Su laughed. With such momentum, if Lu Shi loses, it will be interesting. Yan Lin looked down and sneered. He said, "Lu Shi's subordinates are just like their lord. They are proud and strong-willed. They probably realize that our lord's reputation in Zhangzhou is unshakable. They are afraid that the people will interfere at a critical moment. That's why they came up with this plan." They didn't know that this plan had also pushed their lord into the teeth of the storm. The will of the heavens? As long as Jiang Pingji was not the one who sat on the throne in the end, she would become the joke of the ages. There are pros and cons to this. If she succeeds, she will have a mysterious halo around her. The ignorant people in the world do not have the courage to fight against the immortals. If he failed, it would just be another joke in the annals of history. Qian Su asked, "Is Lu Shi declaring her ambition to the world?" Yan Lin said, "Even if she doesn't say it, who in the world doesn't know of her ambition?" Qian Su smiled and said, "There's still a difference between what everyone knows and what she admits herself." Yan Lin and the others didn't pay much attention to the fact that the Mountain Ghost had taught them how to build ships. Shipbuilding was a secret skill that could not be taught to outsiders. All the famous craftsmen in the south had been recruited by Yang Tao. Those who weren't taken in were mostly raised by others. How high could the standard of Jiang Pingji's warships be? No matter how powerful he was, could he be more powerful than them? The waters south of Zhangzhou were more developed. Shipbuilding technology had been accumulated and improved over the generations. It was considered the best in the world. Most of Jiang Pingji's troops were from the north. Even if she had planned for the navy years in advance, Shipbuilding technology was not something that could be improved by Qi Kuang alone, let alone secretly learn it in a short period of time. According to the estimation of Yin Lin and the others, Jiang Pingji's warships should be slightly inferior to theirs. Naval warfare was not only demanding on the Navy, but also on the quality of the warships. Even if the Navy was strong, they couldn't defeat the enemy without strong warships. Yang Si killed the pirates while fishing. He used interrogation and other techniques to perfect the great universal geographical map of the nearby waters. Such a big movement couldn't escape the eyes of Yin Lin and the others. Yang Tao said, "Why don't we send someone to test the strength of their navy?" Yin Lin said, "Yes, that's what I was thinking." Thus, one group of people disguised themselves as merchants, while the other group disguised themselves as pirates. The two groups of people coincidentally met in a certain region of water. After a short fight, Yang Si had a bad feeling and ordered a retreat. Yin Lin and the others didn't chase after them. What's the situation? For the sake of safety, Yang Tao, Yin Lin, and the others didn't go personally. They only sent a general who was experienced in naval warfare. There were only about 1,000 people on both sides. The battle didn't last long because it was just a test, so it wasn't a fierce battle. As an experienced general, the general had some information about the enemy. He said, "I'm afraid the enemy is harder to deal with than we expected." Yin Lin raised his eyebrows. He didn't expect this answer. "What about the boats they used?" The deputy general said. According to this general's judgment, they should all be the boats of the nearby fishermen. The civilian boats couldn't compare to the warships in terms of size and sturdiness. However, to avoid alerting the enemy, they didn't use warships either. Instead, they used civilian boats that the pirates often used. In terms of boats, the two groups were about the same. The only difference was the combat ability of the soldiers. Yin Lin asked the general about their combat ability, and the general answered truthfully. In short, if he hadn't known that the enemy was a northerner, he wouldn't have been able to tell the difference between them and the Navy from the south. They were good swimmers and coordinated well. They didn't panic at all. This was clearly a well-trained elite of the Navy. If the general hadn't retreated in time, he would have been caught by the enemy and exposed. Even so, he felt that the enemy had realized what was going on. Yang Si guessed it. The pirates they encountered this time were very cooperative. They were a regular army, not a motley crew. Yang Tao frowned and looked at Yin Lin, questioning him with his eyes. Yin Lin said, "My lord, please give the order to send more people to investigate. We must find out how strong they are." No one knew if the navy of 1,000 people was the same as Jiang Pingji's elite navy, or the average navy. There was a big difference between the two. Yang Tao knew that he couldn't be impatient, so he agreed to Yin Lin's suggestion. The two groups began to test each other. The smell of gunpowder was getting stronger. Jiang Pingji's side wasn't going to give in. "Since we're sure that Nieliang doesn't have many days to live, let's add fuel to the fire and send him on his way." Qiguan Rang asked her, "My lord, do you mean to send the troops now? Isn't this too radical and arbitrary?" Chapter 1469. TSK This Nieliang is very tough. Jiang Pingji had sent scouts to investigate several times, but there was almost no substantial gain. Many scouts were killed because their identities were exposed. The scouts under Jiang Pingji's tent were well-trained elites. Even if they were discovered by the enemy, they could turn around and escape at once. They could not escape under such circumstances. It could only be said that Nieliang's attitude was very tough. He was unwilling to let go of any enemy scout. Qiguan Rang waved his jade fan and said, "According to the information from the scouts, Nieliang is ready to take action in the near future." Jiang Pingji rested her chin on her hand and said, "If he doesn't take action, we will. What's the difference?" As they spoke, someone outside the tent reported. Jiang Pingji hurriedly let him in. "What news is there this time?" She shook off the cloth and scanned through it. Qiguan Rang asked with her eyes. Jiang Pingji handed him the cloth and said, "Although this news is not from the front line, it has a lot to do with the Nye family. A team of scouts found more than 100 people behind the Nye family approaching the Nye camp. Their identities are mysterious." When Jiang Pingji relayed the news, Qiguan Rang read the contents of the cloth silently. To prevent their identities from being exposed, the scouts could not get too close. They could only hide in the mountains and dense forests and observe carefully. Based on their rich experience, they roughly figured out the enemy's scale through the hooves, footprints, food leftovers, and campfires left by the enemy. Unfortunately, due to the restrictions of the conditions, they could not figure out the enemy's identity. Qiguan Rang folded the cloth neatly and asked, "Do you have any idea, my lord?" According to the news from the scouts, the scale of the troops was not large. There were only more than 100 people, but every guard was a troop carefully trained by the landowning families. Not only were they experienced in combat, but they were also very strong in reconnaissance and anti-reconnaissance. If that wasn't the case, the scout would have been able to get even closer. Troops were different from ordinary soldiers. In essence, they were more like private troops that were raised by a private person. Jiang Pingji also raised many troops in the past. They became the original capital for her to conquer the world. Looking at the situation, this should be the troops raised by the Nie family. The Nie family sent more than 100 elite guards. I don't know who they are escorting. Although she said that, she was frowning in her heart. The scout said that there were 2 young people in the carriage. Qiguan Rang said, "At this juncture, it's most likely Nie Yang's confidant or direct relative." Jiang Pingji smiled and said, "No matter what his identity is, won't we find out by sending someone to investigate?" For the sake of safety, this group of people chose secluded and quiet country roads, even if they had to take a long detour. Dilly-dallying makes it easier for us to do things. She had always been swift and decisive in her work. Taking advantage of the night, she sent over 100 people to quietly bypass Nie Ying's eyes and ears, intending to intercept that group of people. Because it was difficult to travel at night, even if Nie Qing and the others were in a rush, they could not force themselves. They could only send people to clear out a place to rest. Out of caution, the troops on night watch took turns. 3 groups of people were on duty at the top, middle and bottom of the night, so as to conserve as much energy as possible. In order to lower the target, Nie Qing and Nie Yang sat in the same carriage, eating and living together. Nie Qing took good care of this cousin, and along the way, even the system's heart softened. "He treats you so well, will your heart soften because of this in the future?" Nie Yang's eyes were half closed. In the dark, he could barely see Nie Qing's silhouette lying beside him. He was exceptionally calm. He sneered in his heart, "You've been with me for so many years, but if one day you get in my way, I won't be merciful." This also indirectly answered the system's question. Without waiting for the system to reply, Nie Yang said lazily, "It's late, don't bother me." System. It knew it. As Nie Yang grew older, his ambition grew and he became more and more unruly. How dare he threaten it? The system was furious, but it could not fall out with Nie Yang at this time. So it could only pinch its nose and bear with it. After about a quarter of an hour, the system, which had returned to silence, spoke again. Nie Yang's face was a little sour. It took him a lot of effort to get sleepy, but he did not expect the noisy system to jump out and ruin the mood. The system explained faintly, "It's not that I want to disturb your sweet dreams, but there are enemy forces approaching 2 miles away." Nie Yang woke up in an instant, all the sleepiness gone. He pretended to be startled awake by the nightmare. His nostrils flared, his breathing heavy, cold sweat dripping from his forehead, and fear lingering in his eyes. Nie Qing, who was in a light sleep because he was worried about his father, was easily startled awake by Nie Yang. "Yang, what happened?" Nie Qing grabbed his outer robe and draped it over his shoulders. He lit up the firewood and saw that Nie Yang was in a state of shock, fear lingering in his expression. He said in realization, "Yang, is this a nightmare?" Nie Yang grabbed his wrist and said in a hoarse voice, "Brother, wake him up quickly, something big has happened." Nie Qing looked puzzled. He asked in surprise, "What happened?" Nie Yang spoke quickly, "I had a very realistic nightmare just now. I dreamt that there were dark shadows outside the carriage, shouting and yelling, and someone with a knife broke into the carriage. Brother, in order to protect me, you were slashed by the thief and blood flowed profusely. Nie Qing said in amusement. Isn't I fine? Where did the enemy come from? Nie Yang wet his dry lips with the tip of his tongue and said in a hoarse voice, This dream is really ominous. Brother, you'd rather believe it than not. Nie Qing pondered for a while. Out of love and concern for his cousin, he said, Don't panic, I'll get someone to be on guard. Nie Yang played the role of a frightened rabbit on the surface, but in his heart he asked the system, How many people came? The system gave him a precise number. 112. They should be Lu Shi's ambush troops. Over 100 people? They're obviously prepared. Wait, something's not right. Nie Yang's expression grew colder. He said, No matter how good Lu Shi's eyes and ears are, they can't compare to you, right? If Lu Shi's eyes and ears can discover us, why didn't you warn us along the way? Scouts were humans. They could use the terrain to hide their tracks, but the system was different. Nie Yang had sufficient reason to suspect that the system had discovered the enemy, but was deliberately hiding it. As expected, the system said, It's just a few ants. There's no need to report such a small matter to you. In any case, it didn't endanger your life. Nie Yang laughed coldly. Now it's a threat. If the enemy didn't send 112 people, but 200 or 300, with the advantage of a sneak attack, what would the result be? The system also laughed. Host, you're blessed. This is just a small disaster to you. It won't endanger your life. Nie Yang's heart surged with anger when he heard this, and his molars creaked. How could he not tell that the system was purposely warning him? Chapter 1470. Although he didn't know what kind of monster the system was, Nie Yang wasn't heartless. How could he allow a strange monster to infect his brain without taking any precautions? Not long after the system appeared, Nie Yang made thorough preparations. After all, the previous master of Zhongzhao's Temple of Salvation was enlightened Liru, an expert with real skills and knowledge. Nie Yang had once visited enlightened Liru in Temple of Salvation, under the pretext of accompanying his family's womenfolk. The monster didn't dare to show itself, so it didn't know how old Nie Yang was at that time. It also didn't know what cards Nie Yang had up his sleeves. The system felt uneasy, but comforted itself that Nie Yang was just a mortal, so there was no reason for it to be afraid. As they spoke, Nie Qing had already gotten off the carriage. He called the troops on night watch, and instructed them to be vigilant before daybreak to prevent any sneak attacks. Everyone was suspicious, but this was Nie Qing's order, so they couldn't question it. They could only obey. Can you sleep now? Nie Qing entered the carriage again and smiled warmly. Go to sleep first, Yang. I'll keep watch for you. Nie Yang gripped his blanket tightly. In order not to expose himself, he had to listen to Nie Qing. Seeing that his cousin had fallen asleep, Nie Qing lit an oil lamp and took out a thick book to read. He hadn't even flipped 2 pages when he heard a shout from outside. Who goes there? Just as the troops finished speaking, Nie Qing heard the sound of a knife cutting into flesh. Blood splattered on the ground, followed by the sound of a heavy object hitting the ground. His face paled, and his right hand gripped the thick book tightly. Nie Yang, who had just laid down, stood up. Brother! Nie Yang's face flickered under the orange candlelight, but the fear in his eyes couldn't be concealed. Nie Qing said, Yang, calm down. It's not a good time to get off the carriage. Wait for things to calm down outside. Don't go out and cause more trouble. Both of them had learned swordsmanship, but how could they compare to Protector Chu? If they got off the carriage in a hurry to check on the situation, they would only be adding to the burden of guarding the troops. Nie Qing raised his sword in a defensive stance, the sounds of battle ringing in his ears. The atmosphere was tense and heavy. Even his palms were sweaty. Brother, we won't. Nie Yang was so scared that his eyes turned red and watery. Nie Qing comforted him. Since the heavens made Yang have such a precognitive dream, it means that the heavens are on our side. This intense battle lasted for a quarter of an hour. Because Nie Qing's side had the advantage in numbers, they were prepared, and the enemy's advantage in sneak attacks was minimal. Seeing that the situation was not good, the sneak attacker ordered the remaining soldiers to retreat quickly. The troops were worried that it was a trick to lure the tiger away from the mountain, so they did not dare to pursue. Young master, the enemy has retreated. Hearing this, Nie Qing's hand holding the sword gradually loosened, the sword falling to the ground with a clang. What are our casualties? Nie Qing asked. The troops were not sure either. It was too dark at this time, and after the chaotic battle just now, both sides could barely recognize each other. At this time, the battle had just ended, and the casualties had not been accounted for. However, according to his estimation, they had suffered heavy losses tonight. They had lost half of their forces, and the rest were still injured. In this state, it was really not suitable to stay in the wild. The troops suggested that they leave overnight and rush to the camp as soon as possible. They were still not clear about the enemy's situation, and they did not know if the sneak attack was only once, or if it would come in waves. Nie Qing heard this and said solemnly, "Immediately distribute medicine to the injured soldiers, and reorganize before we set off." If they did not even treat their injuries and unfortunately met the enemy, it would be sending them warmth. Yes, Nie Qing heaved a sigh of relief and said to Nie Yang, "This time, thanks to Ah Yang's warning, otherwise I would have lost my life here." Nie Yang said, "I am not worthy of it. If not for elder brother's protection, I would have lost my life long ago." He naturally did not warn Nie Qing to save him, but to save his own life. The crisis was over. Nie Yang laughed coldly in his heart. "Come, let's have a good talk. System. Huh? Does this mortal mean to threaten me? Who is afraid of who? If I don't teach him a lesson, does he really think that the system is cheap labor?" The night attack failed. This result was out of Jiang Pingji's expectations. According to the soldiers who escaped, the enemy seemed to have predicted it. However, this prediction was not from the beginning. It was more like a spur-of-the-moment idea. Jiang Pingji pinched her chin and said, "Have you found out who the two people in the carriage are?" The soldier said, "The two of them were extremely cautious and did not take a step out." Jiang Pingji sneered and said, "They are quite smart, knowing not to cause trouble for others." After thinking for a while, she said, "You have worked hard tonight. It is more important to go down and treat your injuries. We will reward you afterward." The soldier's face was filled with shame. They could not complete the task entrusted to them by the Lord, so they had no way to accept the reward. Jiang Pingji sent them away, and was about to raise her hand to rub between her eyebrows when Wei Ci walked out from behind the screen. "Lord, I suspect that the two of them are very likely to be," Jiang Pingji said. "Nie Liang's heir, a big fat fish. I have miscalculated. If I had known earlier, I would have sent more people." If it was a general with outstanding martial arts skills, such as Qin Gong, he might have been able to kill Nie Qing and Nie Yang. Wei Ci said, "Why do you say such disheartening words? You know that with more people, it is easy to expose our tracks and make the enemy vigilant." Jiang Pingji rested her chin on her hand and said, "Even so, it is indeed a pity." Wei Ci said, "I am more concerned about one thing. According to our soldiers, the enemy is only on their guard at the last moment." Jiang Pingji's thoughts turned, and she suddenly thought of Nie Yang. It was said that he was the host who had one of the system's fragments. If he was also in the team, it would not be strange for him to predict the enemy's whereabouts in advance. She said, forget it. This matter is enough for Nie Yang to suffer. I wonder how shocked and angry he will be when he finds out." Jiang Pingji's goal was to send Nie Yang to the next world earlier. If she could kill Nie Qing along the way, it would be an additional gain. It was fine even if she could not. She did not need to feel too much pity. Wei Ci sighed softly and said, "I am afraid he will fly into a rage." Wei Ci did not care whether Nie Yang died or not. He only cared about his elder brother Wei Dan, who died of depression in his previous life. Unfortunately, the two brothers were on opposing sides. Some things were destined to not have the best of both worlds. The next day, the scorching sun rose above their heads. Nie Qing and the others successfully met up with the Nie army. Was the young lord attacked? Wei Dan was sent by Nie Liang to fetch Nie Qing. He saw from afar that Nie Qing's team was full of wounded soldiers and was shocked. Due to the bumpy ride, Nie Qing did not sleep much. There was a faint green color and fatigue in his eyes. He said to Wei Dan, "Last night, there was indeed a wave of thieves who took the opportunity to attack, but Ah Yang woke up from his nightmare. That is why the entire army was not wiped out. Wei Dan asked, "Can the young lord be more specific?" Nie Qing recounted the events of last night and mentioned Nie Yang's contributions again to leave a good impression with Wei Dan. Chapter 1471. The Lord has been waiting for you, young master. Please don't delay the time. Even though they were only 2 hours away from Nie Qing's camp, Wei Yong was still worried based on Nie Qing's description. Nie Qing nodded and said warmly, "We'll set off now." After last night's ambush, he knew how dangerous the situation was. Who knew how many evil eyes were hiding in the dark? Nie Qing boarded the carriage with Wei Yong's help. Seeing that Nie Yong was still curled up in his sleeping position, Nie Qing was worried. Last night's ambush had frightened Ah Yong badly. He had nightmares all night. Perhaps it was because the dreams were too terrifying, but his expression was extremely ferocious. Nie Qing tried to wake him up, but there was no response. If not for the fact that he was still breathing, Nie Qing would have suspected that Ah Yong had been captured by the envoys. What kind of nightmare is this? Nie Qing worriedly held Nie Yang's hand. The back of his hand, which had bulging veins, was cold and sticky with sweat. Little did he know that Nie Yang was not having a nightmare. His pain level was several times higher than the most terrifying nightmare. Last night, Nie Yang was angry at the system for hiding things from him, and carefully tested the system's bottom line. The system also sensed that Nie Yang's wings had hardened and was trying to escape its control. After a verbal exchange, it looked like it was going to collapse. Nie Yang had a Taoist treasure given to him by Venerable Liru. It was said to be able to suppress evil spirits. He showed this trump card and tried to negotiate with the system to gain the initiative and control. Unexpectedly, the system flew into a rage and tore off its false pretense. It was no longer gentle and obedient, but instead showed its ferocious side. The consequence of disobedience is being tortured to death. Do you really think a mere mortal can turn the tables in my hands? Although the Taoist treasure given to him by Venerable Liru did not cause any serious damage to the system, it did cause it some damage. This made the system extremely angry. Nie Yang was a mortal that grew up under its nose. He was just one of the many ants who gave him the confidence to try to shake the position of a god, just because he had a trump card. The system did not mind Nie Yang having his own thoughts, but it could not tolerate an ant scheming against it. The system was experienced in dealing with such an unruly host. It guaranteed that it would be obedient. It needed force to make Nie Yang understand that the distance between them was a rift that mere mortals could not cross. Obey or die. Mortal, do you understand? The system wanted to kill Nie Yang for offending it, but it couldn't do that. First of all, it wasn't easy to find a suitable host. It had put in so much effort on Nie Yang. If it gave him up just like that, it would be a big loss. Secondly, Nie Yang's status was neither light nor heavy. He was one of the chess pieces that affected the fate of the entire plane. Once he was touched, the enemy in the dark would immediately notice. The system didn't want to suffer a double loss. Nie Yang was still useful. Since he couldn't replace it, he could only spend some effort to fix it. Nie Yang had never suffered like this before, but the stubbornness and toughness in his bones kept him going. Nie Yang refused to back down, and the system refused to let go, so the situation fell into a stalemate. However, Nie Yang was a mortal after all. He couldn't withstand such torture. He still had ambitions. He knew what it meant to be flexible, and to be able to adapt to the circumstances. He could just temporarily give in, and use the system to achieve his goals. He would find a way to get rid of this demon in the future. After a whole night of torture, Nie Yang opened his eyes tiredly when the troops were about to reach the Nie camp. If Nie Qing looked over, he would see that Nie Yang's eyes were filled with unwillingness and hatred. "Ah Yang, you're awake?" Nie Qing put down the book and heaved a sigh of relief. He hurriedly helped Nie Yang up. At that moment, he noticed that Nie Yang's clothes were drenched in sweat, and there was a human-shaped wet mark where he had fallen asleep. Nie Yang himself looked exhausted. A few strands of his long hair were stuck to the side of his face. His black hair fell over his shoulders, making him look especially weak and pitiful. "Brother!" Nie Yang tried to speak, but his voice was hoarse. His throat was burning. Young, what nightmare did you have last night? No matter how I called you, you wouldn't wake up. Nie Qing's heart ached when he saw his cousin like this. Of course, Nie Young couldn't tell the truth. He still felt like he had just survived a disaster. This made him feel ashamed and disgusted. He had actually succumbed to a demon's coercion. It was a great humiliation. Nie Young said, "This little brother, cough cough, this little brother doesn't know either. I only remember. It was an extremely terrifying dream." Nie Qing saw the lingering fear on his cousin's face and couldn't bear to probe further. He changed the topic. "Father has already sent troops to receive us. The camp is just ahead. Don't be afraid, Yang." Nie Qing patted his back and comforted him like he was coaxing a child. Nie Yang closed his eyes tiredly, letting himself lean on Nie Qing's shoulder. If Nie Qing hadn't blocked his way, Nie Yang would have been happy to have such a considerate and meticulous elder brother take care of him. Because Nie Yang's condition wasn't good, Nie Qing didn't let him get off the carriage. After a short rest, he followed Wei Dan to see his father Nie Liang. Nie Liang already knew that his son had been ambushed in the middle of the night and almost lost his life. For a moment, anger and worry coexisted in his heart. The two attacked his heart and Nie Liang almost fainted. Only when he saw Nie Qing did he feel better. Nie Qing was shocked at first glance when he saw his father. It had only been a while since they last met, and his father had lost so much weight. Even though his father's eyes were as sharp as ever, the greenish black in his eyes was like ink that wouldn't disperse. That face was so pale he didn't look like a living person, and his lips were slightly green. Nie Qing immediately bowed deeply, his eyes slightly red. Nie Liang said coldly, "How old are you? Still crying like a 3-year-old? How can father be at ease when you're so unsteady?" Nie Qing lowered his head to hide his tears. Nie Liang said, "Father heard about your experience last night. You're steady. You've done well in this aspect." Even if he couldn't help, he wouldn't add to the mess. He remembered the saying, "A rich man should not sit under a roof," and wouldn't rashly place himself in a dangerous situation. After repelling the enemy, Nie Qing's handling of the situation was quite thorough. This made Nie Liang feel somewhat moved and gratified. It was a pity that Nie Qing was still too young. Once he wasn't here, how could Nie Qing stabilize the tottering Nie family? How could he control the surrounding demons and monsters? Thinking of this, Nie Liang felt a headache. The father and son talked for a while before Nie Liang sent his son away. A sweet fishy taste surged up his throat. He caught it with a handkerchief and saw the familiar bright red. In a daze, Nie Liang heard the sound of drums outside the tent. He thought he had heard wrong. "Who's beating the drums outside?" The guard outside the tent said, "Reporting to my lord, the enemy has gathered their forces outside the camp to challenge us." When Nie Liang heard this, his pair of phoenix eyes widened in anger. Lu Shi is really going too far. He had bullied his son and almost caused him to send off his son. Then he brought his troops to challenge them. Chapter 1472. Love is not gay. Oh my God. The streamer is running on the road of self-deprecation and not looking back. Shenjia. You almost killed someone's son, and then you brought people to my door and beat me up. I don't even want to help the wall. I only respect the streamer. The salted fishes munched on their melons and moved their small stools over, waiting for the battle to begin. Little White Bunny. There are a lot of trolls on the internet. All of them are saying that the streamer is shameless and sinister. The most vicious thing is a woman's heart. Blue Drawer. Forgive me for being blunt, but the host has been doing things her own way for so many years. When did she ever care about those contrarians? They could even find a reason to scold R&B. They really couldn't think of anything in this world that they couldn't scold. We are calm. Not everyone could accept Jiang Pingji's actions, especially those with fragile hearts. Not only did they have a fragile heart, but they also liked to find fault. Relying on the fact that the streamer couldn't do anything to them, they squatted on the internet to vilify Jiang Pingji. For example, a woman gave birth to a uterus to carry on the family line. It was a duty given by nature. She didn't find a man to marry and have children. Instead, she followed a man to fight for the world. Some reasons were purely Virgin Mary acting up. For example, Jiang Pingji was cruel and merciless. She killed a lot of people. She didn't have the slightest bit of kindness or civility. The most classic sentence of these haters was, "Oh my God, she fought for the world by killing people. Couldn't she evolve peacefully? Can't I use love to influence him? Why did they have to fight and kill? How sinful." Jiang Pingji didn't even bother to roll her eyes at this group of people who had to hold up their fingers like an orchid in a bar. In short, Jiang Pingji had two groups of loyal followers in the two dimensions. One group was the salted fish in the live broadcast room, fighting for a small bench for 10 years like a day. The other group was the haters who slandered her on the internet for 10 years like a day. This was probably true love. Jiang Pingji tried to kill Nie Liang's son on the way, but after she failed, she sent someone to challenge Nie Liang. She deliberately wanted to anger Nie Liang to death. Her intentions were too evil. They had never seen a woman as thick-skinned and vicious as Jiang Pingji. A woman's heart is the most poisonous. Some media outlets even accused her of abetting underage crime and increasing social violence. Anyway, Jiang Pingji couldn't see it, so they could criticize her however they wanted. Looking at the comments of the idle people in the streaming room, Jiang Pingji's reaction was still calm. She even said something extremely infuriating. Host V. The media on your side are already so indignant. Nie Liang, the person involved, should be even more furious, right? They had once again underestimated the host's shamelessness and psychological endurance. The salted fishes were silent for a long time. How could he reply? He could only use ellipses. As they chatted and laughed, the challenge continued. A certain kung fu will make full use of the language style of the boorish school. His challenge can infuriate someone to death. Quite a number of salted fish wished that they could change to something more elegant. Such cursing was very unpleasant to the ears. The scolding is too elegant. The enemy soldiers won't understand. Isn't this playing the lute to a cow? The more vulgar it is, the more people will understand it. Wasn't provoking the enemy to suppress their morale and make them angry? In this era where the literacy rate was less than 1%, people would think that you were soft and powerless, even if you scolded elegantly. A salted fish asked a tricky question. Kojiao Chi fan. Dongqing and Zhongzhou are two different countries. The language barrier must be huge, right? Do you understand? Jiang Pingji said. Don't you know that you can learn scolding words even from a different race? Even if they didn't understand, they knew that the other party was scolding them. This was the charm of scolding. As they spoke, the enemy finally responded. My men. Jiang Pingji drew out the god-slaying sword and carried it on her shoulder. She raised her chin slightly and said arrogantly, It's time to start. Sun Wen, who was supervising the battle, was speechless. This time, they sent out troops to anger Nie Liang. Time was tight. Many weapons could not be in place, and only a part of the army could be brought over. If they really fought, Jiang Pingji's side did not have a big advantage. In order to guard the pass and prevent Nie Liang from sending people to attack Zhanjiang Pass, she had to close the gate tightly. Therefore, the follow-up reinforcements were definitely not as good as the enemy's. Nie Liang rushed into battle, and his preparation was not as good as Jiang Pingji's. If the battle started, he would definitely suffer a small loss. If the two armies fought for a long time, Nie Liang's reinforcements would catch up, and Jiang Pingji would fall into a passive and disadvantageous position. Based on various considerations, Jiang Pingji sent out troops this time to slip away. It was enough to let Nie Liang's troops follow behind them and eat a mouthful of yellow sand. Wasn't it cheap? Extremely cheap. However, Jiang Pingji liked it that way. The old chief who was watching silently in the streaming room chuckled. The 7th Army Corps, the vanguard of the frontline battle, was led astray by Jiang Pingji. If the upper beam was not straight, the lower beam would be crooked. Jiang Pingji was dressed in red and silver armor. The white horse beneath her rushed out of the army like lightning and blended into the vast sea of people, harvesting heads to her heart's content. White, we haven't had such fun in a long time. Ever since little White, the bastard, abducted White. Other than his first child, White had given birth to 3 more times. No matter how hard Jiang Pingji tried, she could not force pregnant women to go to the battlefield. She could only wait for White's boring pregnancy to pass. They had not fought together for a long time. If Little White was not obedient, Jiang Pingji really wanted to stab the horse in the root of its sin. White understood human nature very well, and its already restless and active emotions rose. Its body was relatively large. Although it was not as tall and strong as the heavy horses of the heavy cavalry battalion, it was still a strong and sturdy little girl. Its entire body was covered in armor. White's combat style became wilder and wilder. Its charge was like the weight of Mount Tai. The horse opposite it let out a shrill scream, and had to take a few steps back to stabilize itself. By the time it stabilized itself, the owner on the horse's back had already been beheaded by Jiang Pingji. After killing for a while, Jiang Pingji patted White's neck. "Go back." The Bai was very reluctant. Jiang Pingji smiled and said, "If we accidentally go overboard, those little princesses will act up." She was the Lord. No matter how good she was at fighting, she could not ignore the petty hearts of the civil and military officials. "Later, if they don't catch up to us, I plan to give Nieliang a big gift." Jiang Pingji carried the god-slaying saber for a while until the white horse under her became a scarlet horse. She then retreated reluctantly. Sun Wen silently turned his head to look at his lord. He had not gotten used to having a lord who could fight so well. He chose to ignore the fact that his lord had gone to the battlefield again and asked, "What big gift?" Jiang Pingji said, "A set of gorgeous women's clothes." Sun Wen was speechless. She smiled and said, "If it's not a girl who has to hold up her fingers like an orchid in a club, then it's a weak woman in men's clothes. Otherwise, why can't the enemy even catch up?" "Zaidao, do you think Nieliang will be so angry that he will vomit blood if I give this along with the clothes?" Sun Wen was speechless. His lord was the one who was born with the wrong gender. She could even tell dirty jokes in such a fresh and refined way. Even though Sun Wen's grandson was about to discuss marriage, he still could not accept his lord's dirty jokes. Chapter 1473. No. Perhaps Sun Wen should be more worried about whether his grandson would be led astray by the Lord's side. Gifting women's clothing. This behavior will definitely be criticized in the future. As a conservative old man, Sun Wen did not approve of his lord using such methods to attack the enemy. It was not because of anything else, but it was not good to be recorded in the future history books. Jiang Pingji said with a smile, "So what? A person who conforms to the rules, no matter how well he does, is not as attractive as a person who has a mixed reputation. People should always have some mysterious or interesting things that people will talk about. Only then will the future generations remember them." Sun Wen held back and finally spat out two words that were somewhat overstepping his boundaries. "Nonsense." Sun Wen studied orthodox knowledge and belonged to the conservative faction. However, his lord was a trendy person with active thoughts. For example, in this matter, he felt that a gentleman should cherish his reputation. It did not matter what methods were used to attack the enemy. What was important was his reputation. However, Jiang Pingji did not care about her reputation. She actually came up with such a childish method to provoke him by gifting women's clothing. If Nieliang was angered by her, and something happened to him, would the history books write about her in such a way? Contrarians love to ignore merits and seize on shortcomings and blemishes to make a big fuss. Compared to the achievements of the predecessors, the future generations preferred to use a magnifying glass to find the shortcomings of the predecessors. To put it nicely, it was to use the past as a mirror, history as a mirror to know the vicissitudes of life, and people as a mirror to understand gains and losses. Jiang Pingji's thoughts were different. She said, "Sai, I know what Zaidao is worried about, but no one is perfect. For someone like me who is unprecedented, I'm afraid that if I'm too wise and powerful, unparalleled, virtuous and awe-inspiring, the later generations will feel too much pressure. If I leave some harmless flaws and blemishes, the official and unofficial history books can use them to entertain the future generations." The salted fishes nodded their heads like pounding garlic and eagerly agreed. The streamer was right. They were cheering for their streamer. Sun Wen was speechless. To be narcissistic to such an extent, it was indeed unprecedented in both the past and the future. It was unprecedented in both the past and the present. He suddenly did not want to think about how his lord would be recorded in the history books. They would most likely misinterpret her as a wicked woman with 3 heads and 6 arms, right? After all, the lord was so good at fighting, and could even tell dirty jokes. She could dominate the battlefield by herself with a knife and a horse. When these words were added together, the first impression that would appear in the minds of ordinary people was a big and burly man with a thunderous voice, broad shoulders, and a narrow waist. Thinking of this, Sun Wen tilted his head and glanced at his lord's profile. Perhaps it was because her style was too unlike that of a traditional woman. The world would be awed by her aura at first glance, and then ignore her beauty. In all fairness, his lord's appearance was quite good at fighting. When she was dressed as a man, she looked suave and unparalleled. When she was dressed as a woman, she had a different taste as well. If she could leave behind a few portraits, she might be able to salvage the image of a ferocious and evil woman in the eyes of future generations. Thus, he sincerely suggested, "When my lord returns, can you leave a few more portraits behind?" Jiang Pingji looked at him dumbfoundedly. She did not understand how the topic had changed from the disagreement between the ruler and the minister to painting. While the two of them were conversing, the battlefield was still filled with battle cries. Qin Gong and the other generals carefully mobilized the entire army, ensuring that the soldiers would not be held back by the enemy because of a momentary victory. It was hard to say about Jiang Pingji's other strengths, but she was unusually decisive on the battlefield. The enemy could not trick her with small gains. She said that she wanted to take advantage of the situation and then leave, so she would not allow the soldiers under her command to be greedy and rash. Qin Gong and the others were well aware of this. They were even more careful when leading the troops into battle, not daring to anger her. Report: the reinforcements of the Nya army camp are about to arrive. Upon hearing this, Jiang Pingji and Sun Wen turned their attention to the battlefield. According to the current situation, their army still had the upper hand. If they continued to fight, they would definitely be able to bite off a piece of the enemy's flesh. However, Sun Wen asked, "My lord, do you want to withdraw your troops?" Jiang Pingji said casually, "Why not? Are we waiting for Niel Yang's reinforcements to come and turn the situation around?" Sun Wen understood in his heart. At the same time, he lamented his lord's decisive style. Not to mention the feudal lords, even the ordinary soldiers on the battlefield would not easily make up their minds to withdraw when they saw that the situation was favorable for their side. It was admirable that his lord could resist the temptation of benefits that was so close at hand. After the discussion, Sun Wen sent people to sound the gongs to withdraw the troops. At the same time, he issued several mandatory military orders. The original vanguard troops became the rear. Step by step, they covered the retreat of the main army and retreated from the front line in an orderly manner. The quality of the troops under Jiang Pingji's command was already very high, but there were still some soldiers who were greedy for merits and dilly-dallied and refused to retreat. They were trampled into meat paste by the swarming enemy. Fortunately, there were not many people like this. The elite vanguard troops fought and retreated in an orderly manner. Not long after, they got rid of Niel Yang's vanguard troops and ran away. When Niel Yang's reinforcements arrived at the front line, they could only watch the enemy retreat, stirring up billowing yellow sand. Seeing this, General Nie's already livid face darkened a few shades. Are these bandits born in the year of rabbits? They ran away so quickly. General, should we give chase? Si Jiang was also extremely angry. He had been suppressed and beaten by the enemy just now, and was extremely sullen. When the reinforcements arrived, they finally had a chance to avenge their humiliation. Who would have thought that the enemy would retreat at this critical juncture? Being asked this question by Si Jiang, the Nye general felt extremely depressed. If they did not give chase, the enemy would suddenly come knocking on their door and violently beat up their own people before swaggering off. They would lose face. If they gave chase, they would be afraid that this was the enemy's evil plot. If they gave chase, they would step into a trap. When the enemy retreated, there was order in the chaos. If they gave chase, it would be easy to mess up the army formation. If the enemy took advantage of the chaos in their army formation to turn around and attack, Wouldn't it be a great loss? To give chase or not to give chase, it was not a good choice. The Nye general secretly gritted his teeth. In the end, he still decided to give chase, but he did not dare to go all out. Jiang Pingji's side easily pulled away. When Jiang Pingji's army retreated to Zhanjiang Pass, and the gate was closed again, the Nye army troops arrived late and suffered a wave of arrows on the city wall. The arrows in front were like a tide. The Nye army was not there to break through the pass. In order to reduce casualties, they could only retreat out of the shooting range. The Nye general was speechless. I have something to say, but I don't know if I should say it. You are very arrogant. Does your father know? A certain deputy general muttered. Isn't she playing with people? He had accidentally discovered the truth. Wasn't Jiang Pingji playing with people? Looking at the angry gaze of the Nye army outside the pass, Jiang Pingji rubbed her chin and snapped her fingers. She asked the deputy general guarding the pass on the city wall to come closer and whisper a few words into his ear. Si Jiang accepted the order with a rippling face. After a while, a dozen strong men, who were 8 feet tall and 4 feet wide, stepped on the city wall. Simple loudspeakers made of copper plates were placed in front of them. The strong men gathered their chi and their dantian and shouted loudly. Their voices were like thunder. Chapter 1474. What kind of courteous gift is this? General Niejun was so angry that he almost vomited blood. His entire face looked like he had been constipated for many years. He was unwilling to give the order to retreat, but he was thinking about how to explain himself. Because the two armies had only fought for a short period of time, the actual casualties on both sides were not high, so this battle could not be considered a defeat. There was one thing that could not be ignored. Jiang Pingji's continuous and coquettish actions were equivalent to a loud slap on Niejun's face. They could argue that Jiang Pingji was too shameless, but it couldn't change the fact that they were humiliated. The Nye army had obviously chased Jiang Pingji's army into Zhanjiang Pass, but when they returned, they were like a group of defeated roosters. The frontline military report immediately reached Nye Liang's ears. Before the Nye army's general arrived, he already knew the whole story. Nye Liang's face turned pale after hearing this, but his expression did not change. Only the two people close to him could see that his fingers were trembling slightly because of his anger. Wei Dan and Fan Chen looked at each other. They could see the deep worry and criticism of Jiang Pingji in each other's eyes. Although the other civil and military officials in the tent did not see it, they knew that the atmosphere in the tent was not right. For a moment there was absolute silence. Nye Liang took a deep breath and suppressed the roiling rage in his heart. He would not fly into a rage because of Jiang Pingji's naughtiness, but he did feel uncomfortable. If it wasn't for his excellent endurance, he would have been angered to the point of death. After a while Nye Liang asked, "How's the weather and wind direction tomorrow?" A man stepped out of the tent and cupped his hands. Judging from the weather and wind direction, tomorrow should be a sunny day with a southeast wind. There was little rain in the north, and it was currently summer. It was not difficult to speculate the recent changes in the weather, with some knowledge of geomancy and geography. Now that the weather is dry, withered trees are easily flammable. The southeast wind is just right. Nye Liang lowered his eyes and said, "Order people to prepare dry wood, firewood and black oil. Tomorrow, at the hour of the 3rd day, send troops to attack Zhanjiang Pass. Lu Shi toyed with us today. Tomorrow we will burn him to death." Fan Chen said in surprise. All the trees in the forest near Zhanjiang Pass have been chopped down by Lu Shi's men until only wooden stumps are left. Burning them probably won't work. Nye Liang said, "Smoke and fire scorching, I'll return the favor." Everyone understood that this wasn't a proper attack. It was just a test of the enemy's strength, and at the same time, a way to get back at them for what had happened today. However, they never expected Jiang Pingji to be mischievous. How could being mischievous be enough? Report, there are hundreds of prisoners of war outside the camp. Nye Liang raised his eyebrows and felt that things were not simple. Since he was a captive, he shouldn't have deserted during the battle. He was most likely captured by the enemy before the battle. The enemy captured captives and then released them. What did this mean? Captive? What is Lu Shi up to this time? Fan Shun was subconsciously frightened. From Jiang Pingji to Sun Wen, none of her subordinates were normal. The soldier stammered. Those captives were all dressed in women's clothing. I can't describe them. Huh? Everyone was confused. When they went out to take a look, they were immediately embarrassed and angry. Their decades of self-restraint were all gone. The captives were all elites of the Nye clan, who had been abducted from the front lines. Their battle robes embroidered with the emblem of the Nye clan had been stripped off and replaced with gaudy and extremely ill-fitting female clothes. Like prey, they were tied up in a row with a rope, and their feet were also shackled. According to the scouts' report, they were chased here by Jiang Pingji's cavalry with a shepherd's whip. The soldiers also found a brocade box hanging around the neck of one of them. The words on it were written in flamboyant calligraphy and looked imposing. Gift to Guangshan? For the Lord Nye Liang? One of them took down the brocade box and secretly weighed its weight. Please allow me to examine it, lest there be filth hidden in it and hurt the Lord. A brave general stepped forward and opened the brocade box. He was almost blinded by the jewelry inside. He took a closer look and saw a set of gorgeous jewelry. Underneath it was a set of complicated and gorgeous women's clothing, a sachet, and all kinds of accessories. Everyone was silent. They were speechless, but the anger in their hearts was rising. A set of women's clothing and jewelry was given to the Lord of Guangshan? Immediately, a noble man fainted from anger. The crowd pressed on his philtrum for a long time before he woke up. She's going too far. She's going too far. The noble man was so angry that his fingers were trembling. He had an angry and aggrieved expression. A vicious woman with such filthy, vicious, vulgar thoughts. How is there even an ounce of gentlemanly demeanor in her every move? First, she sent people to attack Nye Liang's only son. The next day, she brought people to attack him. She did not fight properly and left after humiliating him. Now, she dressed the captives in women's clothing. She made them put on makeup and makeup. They wore eye-catching red buttocks, cheeks, and blushes. She also gave Nye Liang a set of women's clothing. Each of these actions was enough to make one Buddha come into being and two Buddhas ascend to heaven. At this moment, someone in the tent said angrily, "Why don't we give her a set of the 4 self-accomplishment classics for women and let her know what a woman's duty is? Come on, let's hurt each other." Although Wei Yong did not look at the person, he felt some contempt in his heart. He flatly refused. No, we're at a disadvantage. What was the 4 self-accomplishment classics for women? It was a malignant tumor that had plagued Zhongzhao for many years. It was an evil thing that the demon Empress created to harm Zhongzhao. In the first few years, everyone was against it. However, there were still some who secretly regarded it as a standard. No one knew what they were after. Jiang Pingji's mischief was indeed disgusting, but it was a normal method of confrontation. If one side sent the 4 self-accomplishment classics for women to attack the other party's gender in order to disgust others, it was tantamount to offending all the women in the world. In essence, they were at a disadvantage and could easily bring shame to their lord Nye Liang. When the person saw Wei Yong speak, he was a little angry, but he did not dare to refute. Someone else was not pleased. What did he mean by at a disadvantage? Could it be that Lu Shi the traitor humiliated the Lord with a set of women's clothing is at a disadvantage? Wei Yong said, "You can send a set of men's clothing over." Everyone was speechless. They all knew that Jiang Pingji initially presented herself as a man. Later, when she became famous at the Huangshui meeting, she changed to a woman. For her, there was actually no difference between men's clothing and women's clothing. If she gave him a set of men's clothing, she might even say thank you. In the summer, she would have an extra set of clothes to change into. She could be shameless enough to say thank you. Could Nye Liang respond by thanking her generously for giving him a change of clothes? Wasn't that nonsense? Probably because he had been provoked previously. Nye Liang was quite calm in the face of the women's clothing and the women's hair. He said calmly, "The goddess has the intention, but I have no intention." Wei Yong was silent for a moment. He instantly understood Nye Liang's response. Chapter 1475. In a few words, Niel Yang turned away the humiliation of gifting women's clothes and made a fool out of Jiang Pingji. According to Niel Yang's words, Jiang Pingji gifting him a set of Lu Shi's women's clothes was not a humiliation, but Jiang Pingji shamelessly courting Niel Yang. However, he rejected her with the reason that the goddess has the heart, but the king has no desire. At the same time, he pointed out that he had a wife and son, and that Jiang Pingji's age was not suitable for him. He also said that her age was more suitable for his son, cleverly resolving the crisis. Lu Shi is affectionate and righteous. My lord burned the women's clothes as a sacrifice to the flag. If you don't inform her, outsiders will inevitably say that you are heartless. Niel Yang looked at Wei Dan and could not help but laugh. In my opinion, Zishun is more romantic. He understands women's thoughts and is unwilling to hurt a beauty's heart. Wei Dan echoed, My lord, please excuse me. Niel Yang asked someone to prepare a brush, ink, paper, and inkstone. He personally wrote a reply to Jiang Pingji. Under the escort of hundreds of men and horses, the messenger rode a fast horse all the way to Zhanjiang Pass, hoping to deliver the letter before nightfall. The soldiers standing guard on the city wall immediately discovered the small group of enemies. Their nerves tightened, and they tightened their grip on the red tasseled spears in their hands. The guard shouted to the enemy below the city wall, Who are you? The atmosphere on and below the city wall was tense, and it seemed like a fight was about to break out. We are under the orders of our lord to deliver a letter to your lord. The messenger hurriedly expressed his intentions, tied the letter to the arrowhead, and drew his heavy bow, aiming at the top of the city wall. With a soft buzz, the arrow left the bowstring and pierced into the gap between the huge rocks on the city wall. The letter has been delivered. Farewell. The messenger put away his long bow and cupped his hands in the direction of the city wall. He grabbed the reins and turned the horse around. When the group of people disappeared on horseback, the soldiers guarding the city wall laboriously took the letter down from the city wall and hurriedly delivered it to the commander's tent. Jiang Pingji smiled and said, Niel Yang wrote a reply to me? Let me see. Is he writing a letter to scold me in exasperation? She was very clear about what she had done. No matter how well-mannered she was, she would still be furious. Writing a letter to scold her back was normal. However, Wei Ci and the rest felt that it was not the case. As the most powerful duke in Zhongzhou, Niel Yang was not that narrow-minded. Just because Jiang Pingji was mischievous, he wrote a letter to scold her. It was too ungentlemanly and uncultured. In the live stream, Salted Fish craned his neck to read the contents of the letter. Tuta Faccio. Looks like our streamer knows her place. Fortunately, this was ancient times when transportation and communication were not developed. If it were modern times, people would definitely crawl along the network cable to beat you up. Those with even a little bit of self-restraint would also block your door and beat you up. Dududu. I have a question. With the streamer's combat ability, asking her to fight one-on-one is like asking for death, okay? Why did she dare to be so naughty? Wasn't it because she could fight? I also felt sorry for Niel Yang. Encountering such an opponent, he would feel aggrieved whether he fought or not. The Salted Fish watched the entire process of Jiang Pingji teasing Niel Yang. Even the woman's top and hair were given by the Salted Fish. Jiang Pingji had originally planned to give her a plain set of female clothes, but the Salted Fishes felt that it was inappropriate and insisted on pink and tender ones. Halfway through, a Salted Fish strongly suggested that she might as well give her a set of morning clothes for mourning. In her opinion, this suggestion was much worse than her own. Silently glancing at the bullet screen, she felt that these Salted Fishes were really evil. They said that they felt sorry for Niel Yang, but in their actions, they could not wait for Jiang Pingji to trample Niel Yang to death. Let me see, what did he write? Jiang Pingji muttered as she took out the letter from the box. With a shake of her wrist, she shook the neatly folded letter open. The handwriting is quite nice, and it has the aura of a master. Niel Yang is already so sick, but his wrist still wields the brush so vigorously. Jiang Pingji commented with praise and sarcasm, then continued to read the contents. The more she read, the more serious her expression became, and a hint of murderous intent appeared between her brows. Qiguan rang, and the others were waiting for news. When they saw their lord's expression, they knew that the letter was not as simple as it seemed. What's written in the letter? Jiang Pingji was so angry that she slammed the letter on the table. The bronze table made a loud noise, and the four corners of the table suspiciously sank by 2 inches. What's written? I've never seen such a narcissistic person. She could not tolerate that he was even more narcissistic than her. Qiguan Rang stepped forward and said, "May I have a look?" Jiang Pingji hummed. "Take it and read it. Just don't be angry, and anything bad will happen to you." Qiguan Rang's face turned ashen after reading it. He handed the letter to Wei Ci, who was closest to him. Wei Ci took it suspiciously, and his expression turned ugly as well. He said, "This is a peace poem." Wei Ci had lived in Zhongzhou for many years in his previous life, so he was naturally familiar with the customs there. Around the flower festival, most of the gentry ladies would get busy and participate in various banquets and poetry meetings. At the same time, men of suitable age would also be invited. To put it bluntly, it was a large-scale matchmaking event. If a woman was interested in a man, she would write a gloomy courtship poem on a handkerchief or a sachet to show off her talent. After the man received it, if he was interested in the woman, he would accept the gift. If he was not interested, he would write a peace poem to reject the gift. Of course, this was a custom from more than 20 years ago. It was once considered a major festival in Zhongzhou. Ever since the demon Empress wrote the 4 self-accomplishment classics for women to restrain the women of the world and impart virtue to them, this tradition was also treated as trash and abandoned. Not to mention matchmaking, exchanging keepsakes in private, even if they met once, it was immoral. Niel Yang wrote this as a reply to convey a message. Don't think too highly of yourself. I'm not interested in you. Qiguan Rang snorted coldly. This Niel Yang can't be underestimated. It was obviously a great humiliation, but not only did he endure it, but he also retaliated beautifully, making Jiang Pingji suffer in silence. He was impressive. Wei Ci's expression was cold, and no one knew what he was thinking. However, his heart was definitely not as calm as he looked. Didn't he see that the letter was about to be crushed into a ball? They were all waiting for Jiang Pingji's decision. Would she write a reply or something else? Jiang Pingji appeared to be free and easy. She said, "What reply?" The 2 feudal lords frequently communicate with each other. What will the future generations say? Niel Yang has already decided on the matter of the women's clothing. If I write again, won't it prove his words? Just ignore him and fight on the battlefield. She really didn't take this matter to heart. At most, she felt that Niel Yang was quite narcissistic. Everyone felt like a fishbone was stuck in their throats. They couldn't wait to run to Niel Yang and get back at him. Don't take this matter to heart. It's just a small trick. Let's meet him on the battlefield. It's getting late. Let's disperse. Everyone dispersed. Those who had work to do, and those who had meals ate. Only Wei Ci sneaked back. Jiang Pingji seemed to have expected it. She rested her chin on her hand and looked at him with a smile. Are you jealous, Zixiao? Wei Ci sighed. Why would I be jealous because of this? He was just worried that his lord was really angry and was putting up a strong front in order not to worry others. Looking at it now, she really didn't take Niel Yang's counterattack to heart. Why did he feel an inexplicable heartache? Chapter 1476. That's a pity. I wanted to see your jealous expression. Jiang Pingji smiled. You're always so calm. Girls sometimes feel insecure. Sometimes. I doubt whether Zixiao's feelings for me are the loyalty of a subject to the emperor, or the love of a man for a woman. Zixiao doesn't intend to give me a response to this. Let me be at ease. Wei Ci closed and opened his eyes again. His gaze was still clear and bright. He knew the woman in front of him too well. She would never worry about the gains and losses of a relationship. He understood this in his previous life. If she really fell in love like an ordinary woman, she would not be the Her Majesty that Wei Ci knew. Jiang Pingji felt a little awkward under his gaze. She coughed lightly. All right, I won't flirt with you anymore. I just wanted to see your jealous reaction. You can't even satisfy me with this. Wei Ci admitted. Of course I feel jealous. It's human nature. Why does my lord think that I don't have the emotions that a normal man should have? Jiang Pingji said. Probably because of the posture? Wei Xi was speechless. The salted fish who were watching the conversation between the two of them instantly received tens of thousands of points of critical damage. Driving in front of 5 million salted fish. Don't the two of you have a conscience? Guikai Guo Fengxiu. Oh, is it only me who's curious about their posture when they're in harmony? Tudu Feiqiu. To the previous comment, 404 warning. We're currently cleaning up the internet. We're cracking down on pornography and illegal publications. Take it easy. The salted fish twitched their mouths. It was fine for the streaming room to serialize pornography and illegal publications, but the crackdown on pornography and illegal publications could not reach here. Moreover, yes Henfengquang. No, the person driving is the streamer. Shouldn't 404 warning be given to her? They were just salted fish who were watching and chatting. Not only did they have to be fed dog food by the streamer, but they were also accidentally injured by 404. It was too pitiful. Jiang Pingji said. Zixiao, did you come back to make me unhappy? Wei Xi admitted honestly. I'm just worried that Niel Yang's wording will hurt my lord. Jiang Pingji said. There's nothing to worry about. For you and Wenzheng, it's a disgrace to your reputation, but it's a trivial matter to me. Niel Yang mustered all his strength to counterattack, but he hit cotton. I felt sorry for him. Zixiao, let me tell you something. In my previous life, I was devastatingly beautiful. My looks were many times better than Lu Shi's face. My figure was also very good. There are so many people who like me. I remember there was a guy with a mental problem. He lived in the same neighborhood as me. He was married and had a child. After the first time we met, he spent all day fantasizing that I liked him and loved him to death. She rarely took the initiative to mention her past life, so Wei Xi listened attentively. Knowing that she was entangled by such a strange person, Wei Xi couldn't help but worry. And then, did he offend you? How can that be? If I'm harmed by him, I might as well kneel in front of the old leader and die. It's too embarrassing. Jiang Pingji waved her hand and said, that person crazily imagined that I liked him. He even posted my portrait on a public platform and passionately confessed to me. He imagined that I also loved him to death. It's worth mentioning that his wife was even weirder. She cried and threw a tantrum several times, telling me not to seduce her husband. Wei Xi frowned when he heard that. Could it be that this couple has lost their minds? Jiang Pingji shrugged and said, they weren't crazy, but there was something wrong with their brains. There was a limit to my tolerance. I beat them up and hung them at a height of 160 stories for 2 days. In order to avoid trouble from public opinion, I smeared them with the military's newly developed invisibility liquid and silencing equipment. Then I found a lawyer to sue them and sent them to a mental hospital for a few days. Jiang Pingji wasn't an orthodox person from a military school. She believed in using violence to curb violence. At that time, she was a genetic warrior with a secret identity. She had to carry out extremely dangerous missions at any time, so her identity couldn't be exposed, let alone her portrait on a public platform. Because of that, she was reprimanded by her superior. Jiang Pingji was so angry that she vented her anger on the couple. Because she did it secretly, she was fine. Otherwise, she would have been criticized. She said, I've even seen such a weirdo. Niel Yang's is just a piece of cake. Wei Xi was speechless. Jiang Pingji was about to proudly talk about other glorious deeds, when the old chief sent her a private message. You Abba. Hang them at a height of 160 stories? Jiang Pingji replied. I brought oxygen patches and thermal pads for them. They won't die from the cold or suffocation at high altitudes. You Abba. Although it violated military law, I wasn't a part of the military at that time. My hands and feet were clean. Others couldn't catch me. The old chief had mixed feelings. She was like a class teacher. Watching the students who graduated from her class confess the pranks they did when they were students. Such a mischievous student was definitely not taught by her. The old chief was doubting his life. Wei Xi also had mixed feelings. He suddenly realized that the place his lord lived in her previous life was a world he couldn't imagine. Only the environment there could make her so open-minded. Wei Si and the others were filled with righteous indignation at Niel Yang's counterattack. Who asked Niel Yang to use the Lord's reputation as a ruse? But the person involved didn't care at all. He laughed bitterly to himself. The Lord wouldn't worry about personal gains and losses because of feelings, but he would. Especially when he realized how big of a gap there was between their worldviews. He became more and more flustered. Instead of that, it would be better to stay at a distance like in her previous life. Perhaps it would be better. The human heart was greedy. After tasting a little sweetness, they would hope for more and be closer. Sometimes Wei Si would despise himself for acting like this. He was bashful, and it was really not pleasant. Just as Wei Si was lost in his thoughts, a shadow came over his head. It turned out that Jiang Pingji had come to him. I wanted to see your jealous look earlier. Now that I've seen it, my heart aches. Am I not torturing myself? Jiang Pingji was originally a person who didn't understand things. Or rather, she was abnormally slow when it came to relationships. She rarely cared about others. She had been in contact with salted fish for so many years, and had unintentionally changed a lot. Zixiao, were you feeling uneasy just now? Can you tell me why? Wei Si naturally didn't want to say it. Those thoughts were really hard to talk about. However, he never knew how to reject what she wanted to do, and what she wanted to obtain. I'm delusional. Is it possible for me to monopolize the person in front of me in this life? He didn't dare to think that way in his previous life. In his previous life, he even went against his will to persuade her to secretly select outstanding men to serve in the palace. It was impossible for the emperor to only have one person by his bedside. This was very dangerous and not good for politics. If the emperor doted on one person, the possibility of his maternal relatives being loved would greatly increase. Historically, it wasn't a good thing for relatives to interfere in politics. Chapter 1477. What, you don't know how to speak? Jiang Pingji waved her hand in front of Wei Si's face, but he still had a cute, lifeless look. Wei Si was too calm and composed. It was as if he could maintain a calm and dignified attitude at all times. It was rare to see him lose his composure like this. Jiang Pingji was not in a hurry to make him come back to his senses. Instead, she smiled and admired him. Wei Si blushed under her scorching gaze. And my lord, Wei Si felt as if his heart was about to jump out of his throat. His ears were filled with the sound of his heartbeat. It was so loud that he could not help but wonder if Jiang Pingji could hear it. As he thought about it, his face, which was already 90% cooked, immediately became very cooked. Jiang Pingji's thumb twitched as she looked at him. Unfortunately, this was a military camp. She did not mind, but she had to take care of Wei Si. A melon that was forcefully taken would not be sweet. That person, his surname is Wei, given name Si, courtesy name Zixiao. This sentence was almost said with his earlobe in her mouth. Her hot breath blew on his sensitive ear, making his mouth and tongue feel hot. Jiang Pingji did not close the streaming room. Their interaction was watched by Salted Fish. Glistening Star Master. Host, are you trying to take revenge on us? Previously, we held back for so many years and didn't touch Beauty CI. Now we have to eat their dog food every few days. I'm full of dog food. The live broadcast room is filled with the smell of dog abuse. Yaoing Yin. Sob. Asterisk. Streamer, you've changed. In the past, you only flirted with Salted Fish, but now you only flirted with Beauty CI. Nia Biling. Host, tell me, are all of us 5 million years old salted fish not as attractive as Beauty CI? Are we salted fish not salty enough? Or is your standards of beauty too high? Look here, there are still 5 million salted fish waiting for you. Tudo feitio. Have some self-awareness. A salted fish is not as important as a beauty. The salted fishes silently watched the two display their affection, and felt stifled. This live stream was too unfriendly to single salted fishes. They thought that the host would stay single with them until the end of time. But they didn't expect that she would secretly betray the organization. Jiang Pingji still had some integrity. She did not do anything shameful in front of 5 million salted fish. She stopped flirting after a while. Wei Ci spent a lot of energy to suppress the waves of excitement in his heart and regain his composure. My lord. Cough, why did my lord suddenly say this? Wei Ci had a reserved temperament. Even though he had seen his majesty in his previous life, he was still a little embarrassed when faced with his lord's straightforwardness and boldness. Jiang Pingji said, "A salted fish once told me that even if a relationship is established, the other half will panic if there is no promise." Wei Ci looked puzzled. Salted fish. Jiang Pingji said, "Salted fish is fish that is marinated in salt and dried in the sun. The salter it is, the more it goes with rice." There was a time when she was browsing through the bullet screen records out of boredom and happened to see such a sentence. At first she was careless and thought that it was unnecessary. However, the situation just now reminded her that even the smartest person would be hesitant and uncertain when it came to feelings. She could afford to make a promise. Wei Ci didn't ask why the dried salted fish could speak, because when his lord spoke, he really couldn't understand. Jiang Pingji glanced at the bullet screen and happened to see a comment. Cafeteria Daffin Auntie. What the streamer means is that Zixiao is the saltiest among all the salted fish, so you picked him to eat. Wuhanyu. Amazing, my boss. Your reading comprehension must be full marks. Ling Dian Xianmeng. The case is solved. We can't compete with Beauty Ci because we aren't as salty as him. Jiang Pingji smiled awkwardly but politely. The salted fish were still chatting and laughing. Jiang Pengji secretly rolled her eyes. I'm afraid Nie Liang won't let this go easily. After Wei Ci calmed down a little, he entered work mode. The charming and ambiguous atmosphere disappeared completely, making people sigh at his ability unwillingly. After a man and a woman confided their feelings to each other, if they didn't have some inappropriate content, wouldn't it be a waste of the atmosphere that was created with great difficulty? The two of them, on the other hand, switched between love and work mode at will. Jiang Pingji said, "He definitely won't let this go easily, but this is also what I want. Isn't it better that Nie Liang is willing to take the initiative to send troops? It saves me the risk of going out of seclusion and increasing the risk. If they attack forcefully, it's mostly a probing attack. They won't use all their strength right from the start." There were more than 200,000 troops on Nie Liang's side. This was not a false number, it was a real 200,000 troops. From this, it could be seen how much pressure Jiang Pingji was under to guard the pass. However, she was sure that the outcome of this battle would be decided in at most half a year. Who asked Nie Liang to have a short life? If the lord of a force died of illness in front of the battle, even if the heir stepped forward to stabilize the situation, the morale of the army and their combat power would be greatly reduced. Apart from that, the Nie camp still had Nie Yang, who carried the system fragment, and had ill intentions towards Nie Liang and Nie Qing. In Jiang Pingji's opinion, the scales of victory and defeat were already tilted towards her. Wei Ci reminded her, "There are still a few batches of our army's supplies that haven't arrived yet." Jiang Pingji said, "I know I can't show my fear." Nie Liang was a shrewd person. If Jiang Pingji showed any signs of lacking confidence, he could not guarantee that he would use all his troops to attack forcefully. After thinking about it, Jiang Pingji asked someone to call Qiguan Rang over to discuss the plan. When Qiguan Rang came over, he discreetly scanned their cheeks, lips, necks, and other places. After confirming that there were no suspicious traces, he bowed to Jiang Pingji and nodded to Wei Ci to greet him. He calmly took a seat at the head of the tent. Jiang Pingji said, "I'm worried that Nie Liang will lead his troops to attack Zhanjiang Pass in the near future." Qiguan Rang could not help but laugh in his heart. His lord had been mischievous a few times in a row. Even the most cultured person would explode, let alone a feudal lord. Wasn't it normal for Nie Liang to lead his troops to attack? However, Nie Liang's temperament determined that he would not put all his eggs in one basket if he was not confident. It's most likely a test, a feint attack. Don't panic, my lord. Jiang Pingji said, "That's true, but we can't let the other party test our depth." Qiguan Rang asked, "What does my lord want to do?" Jiang Pingji said, "Discuss the matter of guarding the pass, how to arrange and settle the troops and supplies." Compared to defense, Jiang Pingji was better at attacking. She had not deeply studied ancient defensive tactics. It was safer to consult a professional about things that she did not understand. Qiguan Rang was undoubtedly the professional among professionals. Everyone knew that Nieliang would lead his troops to get back at them, but they did not expect Nieliang to act so quickly and impatiently. Wei Ci secretly sighed with emotion. His lord's ability to infuriate people was becoming more and more exquisite. He did not have much contact with Nieliang, but he more or less knew some things through the narration of his elder brother in his previous life. His lord could be proud that she could make Nieliang break through her power. Chapter 1478. Report. The messenger hurriedly ran out of the commander's tent. Jiang Pingji asked him, "What's the matter?" "The enemy has gathered 70,000 men and horses outside the pass. They're only an hour away from us." Jiang Pingji had just gotten out of bed and washed up. She heard the news before she even had breakfast. She said, "Nieliang is really fast. Looks like he's pissed off by me." Jiang Pingji didn't sound worried at all. Instead, she was full of pride and joy. She had kept her god-slaying sword for a long time. Even though she saw blood yesterday, it wasn't satisfying enough. Today, the enemy took the initiative to come to her door. If she didn't accept it, she would be letting down Nieliang's kindness. Quickly inform the whole army to prepare for battle. They had to fight a war, but they had to eat too. People were made of iron, and rice was made of steel. They would starve if they skipped a meal. Jiang Pingji seized the time to eat. Her breakfast consisted of 10 plain white steamed buns, a stack of pickled vegetables, and a salted fish. She had a big appetite. She only felt full after eating 10 plain white steamed buns with pickled vegetables and salted fish. Many people in the streaming room liked to watch her eat. Seeing her eat with such relish, they had the illusion that instant noodles had become a delicacy. She finished her breakfast in 5 minutes. Everyone arrived one after another. The enemy was coming aggressively. Jiang Pingji and the others didn't waste any time. They followed Qiguan Rang's plan and defended the pass. On the city wall, Jiang Pingji stepped on the battlement and looked at the vast expanse of darkness at the end of the horizon. "Can't I really lead the troops out of the pass to fight them?" Qiguan Rang said coldly, "No. If my lord goes down, do you think the gate will be closed or open? If it was closed, would they stay on the city wall and watch their lord being imprisoned? If it was open, they could support their lord at any time. Wouldn't that be opening a convenient door for the enemy to break through? If they wanted to go down to defend the city, their lord was really hopeless." Sun Wen, who was beside her, also had an indescribable expression. Jiang Pingji refreshed his understanding of the word lord at any time. After thinking about it, his grandson was still the best. He was obedient and obedient. When the enemy attacked the city, he could focus on doing his job. Although Sun Lan and Fingyi were young, they were more reliable. Sun Wen was very comforted. Jiang Pingji was chased off the city wall. She could only touch White's neck and sigh. "My broadsword is hungry and thirsty. It can't withstand the little princess's prohibition." Dabai's hooves scraped against the ground, creating a shallow crater. Snorting was clearly a little anxious. Jiang Pingji kissed it and said, "You want to kill the enemy with me, right?" White barked like a human, as if agreeing with Jiang Pingji's words. The lifespan of a warhorse was limited. Its golden years were only a few years. When White was less than a year old, Lu Shi bought it and gave it to the original owner, Lu Shi. However, the original owner of the body liked to study and did not like to wear a military uniform. As a descendant of a warhorse, White could only be led to pull a carriage. After that, it followed Jiang Pingji and accompanied her on her expeditions. White's ferocious nature was completely liberated. Midway through, she got pregnant and went offline for a few years. Now that she had finally returned to the battlefield, she was not satisfied. White acted coquettishly towards Jiang Pingji, barking and licking her. He looked like he was clinging to her. Jiang Pingji could not resist Whitey's enthusiasm. She could only smile and promise to bring it along in the next battle. It's hard to forget the beauty's grace. As a horse's beauty, White's enthusiasm was indeed not something an ordinary person could withstand. At the same time, The main force of the Nye army was very close to Zhanjiang Pass. Looking at the densely packed enemy on the city wall, the general of the Nye army suddenly felt a sense of heroism. Get into formation. Even though his lord, Nye Liang, had given the order to feign an attack to test the enemy, he also hoped that Jiang Pingji would suffer some losses in today's battle. How are the preparations on the city wall? The city wall was a chaotic place. Jiang Pingji could guarantee her own safety, but Qiguan Rang and the others would not allow her to take risks. Therefore, she could only temporarily stay at the back and understand the situation at the front line through the messenger. Since she knew that they had to defend the pass, Jiang Pingji ordered people to build trenches and temporary barricades outside Zhanjiang Pass to assist in defending the city. The messenger said, "The military counselor said that everything is ready." Jiang Pingji asked again, "How many archers did the enemy bring? How many weapons do they have?" Zhongzhao's military force had always been the strongest among the 5 countries. Whether it was the quality of the soldiers' combat power or the technical level of the weapons, they surpassed the other 4 countries. This was also the main reason why Zhongzhao could intimidate the other countries. After Zhongzhao was destroyed, the Nye family successively recovered various places and took over the military forces left behind by the royal family of Zhongzhao. Their overall strength could not be underestimated. Even if it was a feint, Jiang Pingji would not let down her guard. The messenger was prepared and answered in detail. Jiang Pingji took a deep breath. She could only suppress her emotions and continue to wait for the battle report from the front line. She believed that Qiguan Rang and Sun Wen would not let Nye Liang take advantage of them if they joined forces. However, the battlefield was ever-changing, and no one could guarantee anything. Jiang Pingji's hearing was excellent. Even if she stayed at the back, she could vaguely hear the war drums and shouts from the front line. Listening to the movements, the 2 sides seemed to be in a stalemate. Although the enemy was feigning an attack, they were serious. The Nye army led the way with wooden carriages equipped with thick shields to resist the tide-like rain of arrows falling from the city wall. The soldiers took the opportunity to advance, approaching the city wall of Zhanjiang Pass with scaling ladders. Although there were several trenches, they could not stop them for long. The enemy used wooden planks to level the ground and smoothly crossed over. Qiguan Rang was not surprised when he saw the situation. He ordered the soldiers to control the bed crossbows and shoot at the people in the designated positions. The penetrating power of the ballistae was much stronger than that of the arrows. A thick arrow landed on the wooden carriage's shield, instantly piercing through the shield and the carriage. The force of the arrow was so great that it instantly destroyed the chariot. However, as soon as a gap appeared, the Nye army soldiers immediately filled it with bronze shields. Qiguan Rang said, "How are the rolling stones and burning oil?" The deputy general said, "Everything is ready. Don't worry, military counselor." Qiguan Rang was not under much pressure. The enemy's advance was not fast. The situation on Sun Wen's side was similar. After the 2 sides fought for a while, the general of the Nye army realized something was wrong. He realized that the enemy's archery was terrifyingly accurate, especially those thick arrows. They had a long range, great strength, and high accuracy. These were not enough to make him feel afraid, but the enemy's combat power was beyond his expectations. The communication was too backward. The distance between Dongqing and Zhongzhao was not close. Even if Nye Liang made Jiang Pingji the #1 enemy to pay attention to, the speed of gathering information between the 2 places could not keep up with the speed of upgrading the woodworking workshop. Fighting a war was not only about manpower and logistics, but also about the level of technology. In the past, because everyone's level was low, the difference could not be seen. Now it was different. Jiang Pingji spent a huge amount of money on the woodworking workshop every year. If Zhang Ping and the others did not give her some real goods, would she give up? Because of the inconvenience of communication, the information held by the 2 families was not equal. Of course, not every soldier could be equipped with sophisticated equipment such as crossbows. Jiang Pingji did not have that much money. Chapter 1479. #Oh my God, Her Majesty's tomb has been opened. Hashtag Wei Xi's face was deathly still. He clenched his teeth and stood at the entrance of the imperial mausoleum. He did not know what had happened. In the blink of an eye, the warm spring of March had turned into July. The unfamiliar environment made him tremble. When he saw the introduction in front of the imperial mausoleum, he felt as if he had fallen into an ice cellar. He was angry and sad. The Jiang dynasty had a total of 13 emperors. The imperial mausoleum was called the Chun Mausoleum, and it was the only imperial mausoleum that was open to the public. Wei Xi did not know what kind of mentality the descendants of the later generations had. They actually allowed the imperial mausoleum to be visited and disturbed the peace of the ancestors. It was really, thinking about it, he did not know what words to use to express the grief and anger in his heart. He could only hold the ticket tightly. He was pushed through the inspection like a piece of wood and entered the first door of the imperial mausoleum. Although it was an imperial mausoleum, the layout did not feel gloomy, but it was not extravagant either. Instead, it looked spacious and simple. There was a long stone corridor leading to the imperial mausoleum. The two walls were carved with the great and small deeds of the great ancestor, from her youth to her old age. Passing through the stone corridor seemed to be looking at her life. As one of the famous tourist attractions in the country, the imperial mausoleum had a limit on the number of tourists it could receive every day. The tickets were often in short supply. Wei Xi followed the crowd for about 100 meters and saw several tour groups. The tour guides were introducing the historical deeds represented by the murals to the tourists. Wei Xi pursed his lips and staggered forward. His pale face made him look like a ghost in the imperial mausoleum. He heard one of the tour guides say, "The mural we are looking at now is the famous great ancestor's admonition. It warned the young emperor of the time not to hold a grand funeral. All the funerary objects should be replaced with ordinary clay. No living people, jade, gold, silver, copper, iron, and the like should be buried with them." This also became a custom passed down by the Jiang dynasty emperors. According to historical records, the most extravagant emperor in the history of the Jiang dynasty was Jiang Renzong. The funerary objects were only 2 more pure gold medals than his ancestors. This also made the funerary customs of the Jiang dynasty extremely simple. At the same time, the imperial mausoleum of this period was also the last target of the tomb raiders, because there was no profit at all. The imperial mausoleum could be considered poor, but the area was not small. It was divided into 5 parts. The stone corridor recorded the events of the emperor's life. The main tomb, where the emperor's coffin was buried. The abode, where the emperor's calligraphy was buried. The official hall, where the statues of the emperor's ministers were placed. And finally, the outer hall, where the statues of thousands of soldiers were placed. According to historical records, except for the current empress, the tombs of the previous 12 emperors were exactly the same. Opening the Chun Mausoleum was equivalent to looking at the tombs of the other 11 emperors. Wei Xi followed the crowd and walked through the stone corridor. There were many people, but fortunately, his body was tall enough to stand out from the crowd. He endured the redness in his eyes as he stood in a corner at the end of the stone corridor, slowly calming down. At this moment, he heard a young female voice speak out the voice in his heart. A great humiliation. Although the imperial family had handed over their authority and become a constitutional monarch, they were not completely dead. They were actually forced to open their ancestors' mausoleum. Wei Xi tilted his head and looked at the source of the voice. He saw a 6 or 7-year-old girl with a straight face and slightly red eyes. "Do you think it's a humiliation too?" Wei Xi asked her. The girl said, "Isn't it?" Wei Xi saw that the girl looked kind, and even had the urge to get close to her. "There are too many people here. Shall I take you somewhere else to wait for your family to come?" There were too many kidnappers. This girl was so pretty, so she might be unlucky. The girl glanced at him, pursed her lips and held out her hand. Wei Xi held her hand and walked forward. He asked casually, "Why did you say it's a great humiliation just now?" The girl said coldly, "Nearly 100 years ago, the power of the people rose and encouraged the people to force the imperial family to reform. The imperial family's influence gradually weakened. The empress of that generation made a decision and took the initiative to sign a constitutional monarch treaty. However, the imperial family is still the imperial family. There are always people who are worried that the Empress will return, so they repeatedly tested the bottom line. The imperial family had already delegated power. Besides a small amount of military power, they basically had no other reliance. They had no choice but to compromise. More than 20 years ago, the mausoleum of Emperor Qin collapsed. The outside world wanted to send experts to intervene in the restoration of the mausoleum, under the pretext of protecting the mausoleum, so that they could study the history of that period. Then, they made an unreasonable request to make it a scenic spot. Wei Xi trembled. That's too much. Then why did they delegate power and establish a constitution? Because. The girl tilted her head and pondered for a while. She said sadly, times are always moving forward. The imperial family can't keep up with the changes. If they stubbornly seize the power of the imperial family and don't let go, they are bound to fight against the trend of the entire era. One of the two has to be sacrificed. The imperial family chose to sacrifice their own interests. On one hand, they are thinking about the stability of the entire country. On the other hand, they are also thinking about long-term survival. There was no change that didn't require blood and sacrifice, unless one side took the initiative to give in and allow the change to happen. Wei Xi felt like a fish bone was stuck in his throat. He almost didn't know how to respond. But the girl's expression suddenly became more severe. She muttered, "The imperial family giving in doesn't mean that they don't remember this feud. Delegating power doesn't mean that they will really be trampled on by others. The feud of being forced to open the mausoleum of the ancestors will be settled sooner or later." The core of this era was technology. The imperial family had never lost in this. Sooner or later, the power of capital that rose during the chaos would lose all the underwear of their ancestors. Ancestors? A trace of astonishment flashed in Wei Xi's eyes. Before he could think more, two mature women with excellent temperaments blocked their way. "Crown Princess Huichang," the girl asked coldly, "can't I come to visit the ancestors during the Dragon Boat Festival?" At this moment, Wei Xi realized that the girl was holding a string of dumplings in her other hand. This girl was indeed. "Madam is angry that you ran away from home without saying anything," the girl said. "It's not the first day she knows that I like to run away from home. At most, she will go back and punish me." The two empresses from the time of the Constitution were quite gentle and soft, at least on the surface. The girl's mother appeared to be good-tempered to outsiders, who knew how cruel she was when she was angry and hit her daughter. "I'll be back after I put the dumplings in." The main mausoleum of Emperor Chun was not open to the public unless it was a special occasion, but the descendants of the imperial family could come to worship their ancestors. Wei Xi found something strange. The two women who called the girl Crown Princess Huichang didn't see him. The girl pulled Wei Xi through the secret passage to the main mausoleum of the imperial mausoleum. The surroundings were empty, except for the lights near the dome. There was only one coffin in the main mausoleum of the imperial mausoleum, but there were two corpses buried in it. Other than the direct descendants of the imperial family, no one knew the identity of the other male corpse. Some gossip experts did all kinds of research, but unfortunately, they didn't guess correctly. The girl was baffled. The male corpse in the coffin was also her ancestor. To put it bluntly, it was her family matter. What was the point of outsiders studying it? Wei Xi saw the girl put the two dumplings on a plate and respectfully saluted her. She said, "This is the first time I've seen my ancestor's spirit. The portrait left by my ancestor is quite realistic. Otherwise, I wouldn't have recognized it." Wei Xi was speechless. This child was a bit smart. "I'm here to see her. What happens after you see her?" Chapter 1480. Even if it was a tentative attack, the troops under Niel Yang's command were not pushovers. They actually put a certain amount of pressure on Zhanjiang Pass. However, Qiguan Rang had considered this long ago. He made full use of the terrain of Zhanjiang Pass. While commanding on the city wall, he ordered the archers and soldiers who operated the crossbows to focus on attacking the weakest parts of the enemy's formation. Combined with the terrain, the speed of Nieliang's army's advance was greatly reduced. Jiang Pingji waited at the back for a while. She could not sit still anymore. Although the messengers would send back the important information of the battlefield, it was not as good as seeing it with her own eyes. It's been almost 15 minutes. The enemy still has no intention of retreating? At present, there were not many casualties on both sides. When Nieliang's army set up ladders and covered the battering pillars to hit the city gate, the casualties would increase dramatically, because it would be crowded at that time. Even a blind man could kill 2 birds with 1 stone. When the attacking side climbed the wall using ladders or ropes, the defending side would knock people down. According to the height of the city gate of Zhangjiang Pass, it would basically be a child falling down. If they really entered this stage, the losses of Nieliang's army would be much greater than now. Jiang Pingji muttered, "It's just a feint. Why work so hard?" She was bored out of her mind. The salted fish in the streaming room were even more bored than her. The battle report was not exciting enough. They wanted to watch the battle at the front line. Just listening to the battle report felt like scratching an itch. It was better not to listen, but it was even more uncomfortable. Fitness Darren. "Hey, why is Nieliang working so hard this time?" Streamer, "Don't you have any idea? If she didn't anger Nieliang, why would he be so angry?" Slimming Gazai. "I now feel like a player who participated in the World Cup, but sat on the bench from beginning to end. He watched his teammates gallop on the field, but he could only be moldy from idleness. Isn't the streamer a husky? Can you stand squatting at the back?" Although many salted fish complained that the streaming room was too bloody and violent, there were also many salted fish who liked it. Jiang Pingji was a battle maniac who fought on the front line, but now she was sitting on the bench. Those salted fish felt bad for her. The salted fish fanned the flames. Jiang Pingji was someone who could not sit still. She immediately decided to climb up the city wall and join in. Everyone! The flames of war raged on the city walls. The enemy army had already set up ladders in an attempt to scale the walls and fight. Qiguan Rang and his companion were able to keep their composure. The enemy did not panic after setting up the ladder. They waited for them to climb 2/3 of the way up before pushing the ladder down. The ropes they threw up were treated the same way. However, the same method did not work every time. The enemies swarmed over like hornets and gathered under the city walls. The enemy archers used arrows that had been smeared with black oil to disrupt the guards on the walls. At the same time, they provided cover for the soldiers climbing the walls. Their coordination was excellent. The area of the city walls was limited, and the number of guards was naturally limited as well. If these people panicked, they would not be able to effectively push the enemy down, and the city walls would definitely fall. Qiguan Rang and Sun, one would not make such a mistake. The soldiers under Jiang Pingji's command were the most obedient. They had been brainwashed by the camp's political commissar for a few years after they entered the military camp. Even if they were all afraid of death, when the horn sounded, they would still rush forward, because their bodies had already formed a reflex response to the command. Sun Wen was still merciful. He ordered the soldiers in the watchtower to observe the abnormal movements of the enemy's rear defense line. He also ordered the archers to divide into 3 waves. The first wave would shoot at the enemy archers at the front line below the city walls. After shooting, they would retreat half a step and let another wave of archers fill in the gaps as much as possible. The third wave was responsible for the enemies who tried to climb up the city walls. In addition, there were soldiers holding red-tasseled spears. They aimed at the enemy's eyes, cheeks, throats, and other parts and directly stabbed them down. There seemed to be many soldiers on the city walls, but the rhythm of the battle was fast and steady. Qiguan Rang's side was much more ruthless. Not only did archers and soldiers with long spears interfere with climbing the walls, but he also poured water and burned charcoal. When a basin of boiling hot water was poured down, the faces of the soldiers at the top of the ladders were basically scalded. The soldiers at the bottom were not only hit in the face by objects thrown from high up in the sky, but the unlucky ones were also splashed by hot water and charcoal. If it was not for the lack of time, Qiguan Rang wanted to embed iron caltrops on the battlements of the city walls. If the enemy dared to climb the wall, their hands and feet would be pierced and bloody. However, this proposal was rejected by his lord. The reason was simple. Iron caltrops are not made of iron. In addition to these routine operations, Qiguanrang also hung iron planks covered with thick iron nails on the city walls. The soldiers only needed to loosen the ropes to stab the iron planks at the enemies who tried to climb the wall. When they pulled the ropes back, the corpses of the enemies, which were riddled with holes, would be knocked down the city walls. After a wave of probing, the enemies could not successfully climb the city walls. On the other hand, Nielyang carefully noted down the defensive objects used by the enemies on the city walls. The first wave of attack did not gain much of an advantage. Niejun did not give up. Instead, he ordered the soldiers to push dozens of catapults. The catapults of this era were not Jiang Pingji's original creation. They were also used on a large scale during the war. They could be considered a weapon of mass destruction in war. The giant catapults she used to attack Chang'an district had been improved several times. Their overall performance, whether it was the accuracy of the fixed-point projectiles, the projectile distance, or the force of the attack, was much higher than the average standard of this era. Of course, as a big country among the 5 countries, Zhongzhao's technological level was not low. Even if the power of the catapults in front of them was not as good as the ones prepared by Jiang Pingji, they were not weak. Thinking of this, Qiguanrang, who had originally planned to hide his trump card, had no choice but to reveal one of his trump cards. The size and transportation of the catapults were a big problem. Jiang Pingji asked Zhang Ping and the others to research other models of catapults. They gave up a certain carrying capacity in exchange for a longer throwing distance and more dexterity, further simplifying the operation. The simplified operation meant that the time from loading, throwing, and firing of the catapults was shortened. When the enemy fired one shot, their side could throw 3 times and adjust the angle of the projectile, who wouldn't hurt each other. Although the power of the catapults was great, Zhanjiang Pass was a dangerous pass. The stones used to build the city walls were huge stones used to build the Great Wall. They were huge and dense. It was difficult for ordinary heavy objects to pose a threat. Nielyang's army had obviously considered this point, so they aimed at the soldiers on the city walls. Because of the height of the city walls, the distance of the catapults could not be too far, which happened to be within the range of the ballistae on the city walls. When Zheng ordered the soldiers to aim at the joints of their catapults, Qiguanrang's expression was solemn. Seeing the enemy deploy the catapults, he was already in a bad mood. When he heard the familiar voice, he almost choked. "My lord, it's dangerous here. Please leave immediately." Qiguanrang was well aware of the power of the catapults. Even if his side retaliated, the casualties would not be reduced. Chapter 1481. Jiang Pingji looked helpless. She said, "Don't panic. Do you know how to be steady?" Qiguanrang's most precious feather fan was thrown aside. If he was not rational, he would have carried her away. Whether he could win or not, that was another matter. "My lord," Jiang Pingji said, "if you have the time to persuade me, do as I say. Order people to adjust the angle of attack and aim at the joints of the enemy's catapult. As long as their catapult is destroyed, the crisis will naturally be resolved. If not, order people to use fire arrows." Most catapult carts were made of wood. It was not that it was bad to use metal, but because the smelting technology was not good, there was not much copper and iron produced. If the catapult was made of metal, it would not be easy to transport in war. The cost was high, so wood was better. Because it was made of wood, the joints were either tied with mortise and tenon or thick ropes. The former was fine, but the latter was easy to loosen. If fire arrows or crossbows were used to aim at the joints, they should be able to hit the enemy's catapult. If one arrow did not work, use 2 arrows. If 2 arrows did not work, use 3 arrows. They could not be restricted, and let the enemy attack freely. Qiguanrang saw that his lord was unmoved, and could only sigh. He was secretly prepared to apologize. If his lord was injured, he would be the scapegoat. Who asked him to not be able to persuade his lord? Instead he indulged her? Yes. Guanrang immediately passed down the order, while continuing to target the enemy who tried to climb the wall. Some people were sent to deal with the catapult. Jiang Pingji said, "Fortunately, we are defending the city. The catapult can be covered by the wall. Otherwise, it would most likely be the same result." Guanrang was speechless. To be honest, he knew about burning the catapult. If Jiang Pingji did not come, he would have done the same, but to aim at the joints, Guanrang understood a little. Why did his lord like carpentry so much? It was not without its benefits. The enemy used the catapult to attack the city. Naturally, they would not carelessly leave an empty space. The catapult was also heavily protected. Jiang Pingji asked a soldier operating the crossbow to stand up and give his seat to her. Although she could not kill to her heart's content, she could also show off her archery skills. Seeing this, Guanrang could only sigh and ask the soldiers to protect her to prevent her from being injured by stray arrows. The power of the ballistae was obvious to all, not to mention the fact that the ballistae they were using now were the strengthened version that had been improved several times. Not only did it have additional parts to assist in aiming, but its shooting range was also much better than the original version. The battle cries were deafening outside, but Jiang Pingji had no distractions. All she had to do was aim and fire. This version of the bed crossbow also had an enhanced continuous firing function. There was no need to stop shooting when reloading the arrows, because there were other soldiers helping to reload. For the sake of safety, the other soldiers who operated the ballistae chose to attack the base or other fixed parts of the catapult. Jiang Pingji chose to attack the lever of the catapult. Even though the lever could move for Jiang Pingji, a fixed target and a moving target were the same. In addition, choosing the lever as a target also had its advantages. At the very least, it wouldn't be as crowded as the base. From the perspective of the salted fish, they did not even know which catapult Jiang Pingji had chosen, let alone the location of the catapult. When she shot several arrows at lightning speed, each arrow hitting the same part of the throwing lever, the salted fish could only cheer for Jiang Pingji. Meng Xian Xiao Kuai. I gracefully present this year's need to the streamer. Please accept it. Qi Qingcheng. As a salted fish, can I ask a question in a low voice? Why are you cheering for me again? The battlefield was chaotic. Every salted fish had a different focus. The streaming room was a live broadcast, so it was impossible to replay it. Therefore, many salted fish did not know what had happened. They just followed suit and cheered for her. Anyway, it couldn't be wrong. Zhenxiang warning. With my excellent dynamic vision, I can responsibly tell you how awesome the streamer's operation is. That soul imprint just now was simply too cool. At the same time that the enemy's catapult shot, the streamer shot several arrows and broke the throwing lever. The lever broke, and the catapult did not have enough strength. It fell from the sky and hit the enemy's camp. Such a huge rock could probably smash 3 or 4 people into meat paste. Jiang Pingji pursed her lips tightly and asked someone to adjust the angle to another catapult within the shooting range. Huge rocks were thrown from above and below the city walls. Both sides suffered heavy casualties. Jiang Pingji's hands were still steady, and she did not sweat. With a series of maneuvers, she accurately destroyed 5 of the enemy's catapults. The pressure on the city walls within the range of the 5 catapults was instantly reduced. The other soldiers also had some gains. When the pressure on their side was reduced, the pressure on the enemy soared. Nie Liang, who was supervising the battle from the rear, frowned deeply. His pale face made the green in his eyes look even more terrifying. My lord, Nie Liang said, I underestimated Lu Shi's ability. In less than 15 minutes, the enemy had successively destroyed the catapults within a small area. It was obvious that the enemy had a general with superb archery skills. Every one of these catapults had been broken by the enemy's attack on their weak points during the process of being launched. The battlefield was chaotic, and it took a lot of time to replace the throwing lever. It was almost equivalent to being useless. Why haven't I heard of such a person in Lu Shi's camp before? This kind of archery skill was used to defend the city and greatly limited the catapults of the attacking side. It was simply a nightmare. Nie Liang saw that no one answered inside. Forget it. It's about time for today. The number of catapults they brought to attack the city this time was not many. The enemy was so good at dismantling them. The possibility of successfully attacking the city was almost zero. Nieliang was not a stubborn person who sought victory. He clearly remembered the real purpose of today. He lowered his eyes and issued several orders. The depth of his eyes seemed to be like a bottomless abyss. Not long after, Qiguan rang, and the others also realized that the enemy's attack had slowed down. It seemed that they had the intention of retreating. After fighting for 2 hours, the total number of casualties on both sides was close to 7,000. If they continued to waste time, none of them would have an advantage. Nieliang's side was feigning an attack. They had enough people, but they did not bring enough military supplies. Their endurance was worrying. Jiangpingji also had a few batches of supplies on the way. If they continued to carry them, they would inevitably face the predicament of not having enough supplies to defend the city. They were relieved that Nieliang had retreated. Jiangpingji watched for a while, but she had a bad feeling in her heart. Qiguan Rang also said, Nieliang suffered such a big loss yesterday. If he retreated without a winner being decided today, wouldn't it be? Thinking of this, he felt that Nieliang still had a trick up his sleeve. That's right. At this moment, what trick could Nieliang have? Jiangpingji stood on the city wall and looked down. She suddenly remembered something when she saw a pile of corpses piled up high. Wenjing, your subject is here. Quickly order people to prepare water. Take preventive measures, Jiangpingji said. I suddenly thought of Jiamen Pass. Chapter 1482. Jiamen Pass. Qiguan Rang frowned. He seemed to remember something and asked in surprise. My lord, do you mean to attack with fire? Jiangpingji pointed at the corpses piled up at the foot of the city wall. Some were dead, some were still breathing, but their injuries were too severe. They were probably struggling at death's door. She said, although there's no dry wood nearby to help with the burning, it's not easy to put out these corpses when they burn. That was the only guess Jiangpingji had left after thinking about it. She didn't know if she had guessed correctly, but it was better to be prepared. It was better to be more vigilant. Qiguan Rang didn't dare to delay, and immediately gave the order. Although they reacted fast enough, they still couldn't keep up with the changes on the battlefield. Nieliang didn't retreat immediately. Instead, he chose to retreat while fighting. He wanted to maintain order and reduce casualties as much as possible. When two armies fought, retreat was also important. If one side was defeated and fled without a second thought, it was basically over. The enemy could take advantage of the chaos and chase after them, especially when they met someone like Jiangpingji who loved to fight. Even if she was the general guarding the pass, she would lead her troops out of the pass to chase after the enemy. How could they reduce casualties and deter the enemy from chasing after them? Of course, it was to send people to stall the enemy and fight while retreating. Only by maintaining the army's formation could they reduce losses. Exposing one's back to the enemy, without taking any precautions, was tantamount to handing over one's life to the enemy. Nieliang naturally wouldn't make such a mistake. While they retreated, the rain of arrows on the city wall didn't stop. The enemy slowly retreated more than 30 meters, but Jiangpingji didn't dare to let her guard down. She frowned even more. Just a small fire attack. Nieliang looked at the city wall. Although he couldn't see who was standing on it, he was sure that Jiangpingji was paying attention to the situation at the front like him. Of course, he remembered the humiliation yesterday. Today, he pretended to attack to test the enemy's strength, but he also wanted to get back at her. Unfortunately, Jiangpingji was too cautious. She had already cleaned up the forest near Zhanjiang Pass. If not for this great fire might have surrounded the entire Zhanjiang Pass. It was a southeast wind that day. The wind wasn't strong, but it was just right for Nieliang. Thousands of archers shot arrows at the corpses below the city wall. Wave after wave, none of the arrows reached the battlements. Some soldiers who didn't know what was going on couldn't help but laugh. What was the use of shooting rockets at a dead person? Jiangpingji's face turned solemn, because she smelled a familiar pungent smell in the wind. It was easy to miss if one did not smell it carefully. Both sides had used fire arrows during the battle. As a result, the battlefield was filled with thick smoke. Some unlucky corpses were hit, and their clothes and corpses gave off a burnt smell. Under the cover of this smell, the smell of black oil, kerosene, and sulfur was easily ignored. Jiang Pingji stood on the city wall and looked down. She scanned her surroundings. After a while, she found that the clothes worn by the enemy's corpses were a little strange. Some of the soldiers even had firewood wrapped around their waists. The firewood was bound in linen cloth that had been washed with black oil. The scene of the battle between the two armies was extremely chaotic. Neither the supervisors nor the frontline soldiers noticed this, so it was easy to overlook it. This Nie Liang, Jiang Pingji clenched her fists. On the other side, Sun Wan, who was supervising the battle, also noticed that the speed at which the corpses were burning was abnormal. In the span of a few breaths, the small flame had turned into a towering blaze that quickly spread. If the city wall of Zhanjiang Pass had not been made of huge stones, the fire would have reached it. Seeing that Zhanjiang Pass in the distance was surrounded by orange flames that soared into the sky, Nie Liang's depressed mood eased a little. Zixuan, send someone to investigate which General Lu she promoted after this battle. On the battlefield, he could consecutively destroy several catapults in a very short period of time. Such archery skills could be considered valiant anywhere. He might not become the main general to lead the troops to kill the enemy, but he would not be a nobody. It was impossible for Jiang Pingji not to reward him generously for his meritorious service. Nie Liang only needed to send someone to pay attention to who was promoted and rewarded. He could basically lock onto his target. Wei Yong agreed in a low voice. He saw that Nie Liang's complexion had improved a little, and his mood also relaxed a lot. There's one thing that we need to pay attention to. The catapults under Lu Shi's command are obviously better than ours. Their power is extraordinary. Nie Liang's feigned attack was not only to regain his dignity, but also to find out the enemy's background and see what cards they had up their sleeves. When the enemy showed off the catapults, he did not pay attention, but he soon discovered that the frequency and distance of the catapults on the enemy's city wall were much higher than his own. If he only discovered this during the final battle, he would definitely be caught off guard by the enemy. He could still make up for it now. Wei Yong said, Lu Shi values the Mahists very much. He is very respectful to the scholars who are from the Mahists under his command. It is expected that the catapults are powerful. I'm just worried that other than the catapults, they are still hiding other killing moves that they have yet to reveal. Nie Liang asked him, did the spies we sent out find out any relevant information? Lu Shi is extremely cautious in his work, and he is very strict in guarding the supplies. No matter who it is, they need to show their token and register their name to enter and exit. Our spies can't find out more. Wei Yong shook his head regretfully and changed the topic. However, a few years ago, before Lu Shi grew up, I did leave a trick up my sleeve and ordered a few men of sacrifice to sneak into Dongqing. They seem to have gained a lot and are currently on their way back secretly. Nie Liang said. Zixuan is still more thoughtful. Wei Yong shook his head and sighed. No, it's only because of my third brother. That one called Wei Ci. Nie Liang still remembered Wei Ci. After all, there were not many men with such charm in the world. He was a person who left a deep impression. Speaking of which, Wei Ci could be considered as Nie Liang's savior. If Wei Ci had not taken his pulse, Nie Liang might have only realized that he had been tampered with before he died. Even if the lord chosen by Zixiao doesn't show it on the outside, there must be something extraordinary about her. We have to guard against her. If Jiang Pingji knew about this news, she might be angry for a while. In fact, Jiang Pingji was very angry now. The fire spread very quickly. Even though Qiguan Rang had sent people to fetch water, Nie Liang used black oil and other substances to ignite the fire. There were thousands of corpses burning underneath. It was impossible to extinguish the fire by relying on manpower. There was something that was even more annoying. When the enemy soldiers climbed the ladder for the last time, they secretly pierced the sack containing the black oil and let the black oil flow down the city wall. When the corpses below formed a big fire, the flames ignited the black oil on the city wall. The flames climbed up from below and spread to the towers and watchtowers on the city wall. For a moment, everyone was in a sorry state. Even so, Jiang Pingji could only suppress her anger and order people to move the injured soldiers and catapults on the city wall. Chapter 1483. The wind fanned the flames, and the fire burned vigorously. Even from far away, one could see the thick smoke rising into the sky from Zhangjiang Pass. Jiang Pingji and the rest looked calm. Not to mention them, the soldiers under the tent did not have any reaction. Those who were supposed to put out the fire did so. Those who were supposed to move the injured soldiers did so. And those who were supposed to move the catapult carts did so. The mental fortitude of the idle fish in the live broadcast room was not as strong. Many salted fish covered their mouths and vomited after watching for a while. Especially when Jiang Pingji said, "There's the smell of cooked meat in the air." The entire bullet screen stopped. She had been chased off the city gate tower by Qiguan Rang and was feeling gloomy. When she saw the salted fish's reaction, her depressed mood rose a few notches. "Hosvi, no way. How many years have you been with me? What kind of bloody and violent scenes have you not seen? This is just a small matter. Calm down." There were some things that the more one saw, the more one would naturally calm down. They were still lacking in knowledge. Jiang Pingji spoke casually, as if what was burning outside was not thousands of corpses, but thousands of suckling pigs. "Tuta Faccio, you can never get used to this kind of thing. After all, the environment is different." Guikai Guofeng Xiao. "Once again, I'm impressed. I can travel to another world, but not in the ancient times. If I have to be in the ancient times, I can't be in troubled times. If I have to be in troubled times, I can't be a soldier. If I have to be a soldier, I can't be a pawn." The victory of the two feudal vassals was basically piled up with the lives of the soldiers at the bottom. It wasn't that the host wasn't good, it was just that as a pawn, he really didn't have any future. Yen Tianmen Granduncle Master. Speaking of time travel, I suddenly remembered that the next round of Dream of 1,000 Years will start the day after tomorrow. Puff up proud flat chest. He's a lucky emperor after all. His treatment shouldn't be that bad. It'll be a pain in the ass if he's sent to the battlefield. Yu Longyin. Aren't they afraid of being thrown into the battlefield? Are they deserters? If they meet the streamer, maybe they can ask for her autograph and take a picture with her. The salted fish were the best at straying from the topic. Just a moment ago, they were trembling in fear, covering their mouths and vomiting. Now that their attention was diverted, they immediately began to imagine the identity of the next Dream of 1,000 Years lucky emperor. Some people teased, while others immediately came up with interesting jokes. Looking at the streaming room that had returned to normal, Jiang Pingji snorted secretly. She was really bored out of her mind. She was actually worried about these salted fishes not adapting well. They were clearly adapting well. She, on the other hand, should be the one worrying. Once again, I'm impressed by my brilliance. Jiang Pingji glanced at the god-slaying saber in her hand and sighed. If I hadn't cut down the nearby trees in advance, I don't know how long this fire would have lasted. Perhaps Nie Liang would have been able to take advantage of the situation and break through. Just as she was feeling emotional, the old general's private message rang. Your Abba. It's going to rain soon. This is really the work of the chosen one. Jiang Pingji's face was full of questions. Rain? At this time? She looked up at the sky. It had been dark since morning. She could see that it had been raining recently, but not today. The old chief quickly sent her another message, mocking Jiang Pingji's failure in geography. Your Abba. Even though you're already the Legion commander and the future marshal of the Federation, and no one will question your education background, don't let the cat out of the bag. Didn't you notice that the terrain of Zhangjiang Pass is very strange? The pass is narrow, the hinterland is wide, the mountains on both sides are high and steep, and the middle is low. This kind of terrain is quite bad in terms of air circulation. It should have been raining on your side, but the fire accelerated the formation of the rainwater. In my opinion, at this rate, it will rain in half an hour at most. Don't you think you should prepare for it? Jiang Pingji also heard it, and she suddenly looked a little embarrassed. I entered the children's military school when I was very young. Within 2 years, I was directly recruited into the genetic warrior training camp. It's normal for me to fail my cultural classes. Jiang Pingji began to act shamelessly. How could she admit that she was not cultured enough? Really? It will rain in half an hour? The dear old chief only gave her the 8 syllables. It was up to her whether she believed it or not. Jiang Pingji, you're the top student, you're right. She was thinking about how to manipulate the situation when a gust of wind came in. My lord, I have something to report. Jiang Pingji said. Coincidentally, I also have something to tell you. Wei Xi said. My lord, you may speak first. Jiang Pingji said. I have a premonition that it's going to rain soon. Wei Xi could not help but laugh. Coincidentally, I want to talk about this too. After the fire was ignited, the southeast wind, which was originally gentle, grew stronger. The wind fueled the fire, and it burned even more fiercely at the pass. The sky, which was initially bright, seemed to be covered with a layer of black gauze, and there was a faint trend of rain. Jiang Pingji smiled evilly. I hope that before the fire is extinguished, it will rain, even if it's just a drizzle. Exactly, Wei Xi said. At least the enemy will know. Jiang Pingji said to him. One is marked by the company one keeps. The ancients did not deceive me. Wei Xi was also black-hearted. If Niel Yang really knew, he would be so angry that he would be in trouble. It was not easy to get back at them with the fire. But who knew that the heavens would not give them face and send rain to help Jiang Pingji and the others extinguish the fire? Although this was a normal change in the weather, with a little use of public opinion, the image of their lord as the child of destiny could be created in an instant. Once it was confirmed, the soldiers under Niel Yang's tent would probably be restless for a while. They were naturally not afraid of fighting with others, but if they were to fight with the child of destiny, chosen by the heavens, would there be any hope of victory? Once the morale of the army was shaken, the morale would also be low. Jiang Pingji was used to using her advantages, so she would naturally not let go of this marketing opportunity. She looked at Wei Xi and said, Zixiao, do you think I should set up an altar or perform a sword dance to pray for rain? It would be more effective. Wei Xi said, No, if there is no rain, won't the Lord be passive? Even if Wei Xi was 90% confident, he dared not joke around with Jiang Pingji's reputation. Wei Xi rejected it, and Jiang Pingji did not insist. She did not like to dance. The two of them muttered. Qiguan rang, and the others were in a much more difficult situation. Old Master Sun Wen was sent away due to his old age, so he could not leave at will. His originally fair and clean face was smoked black, and the beard that he carefully groomed every day was also a little burnt. Because the fire could not be controlled, Qiguan Rang could only retreat from the danger zone. The medic saw that the back of his hand was red and swollen, and he suggested, Military advisor, the back of your hand is swollen. Why don't you apply some ointment on it first? Qiguan Rang agreed. When the medic applied ointment on his hand, a drop of water fell on his eyelashes. He blinked subconsciously, and after a while, another drop of water fell between his eyebrows. Qiguan Rang widened his eyes in shock, and he asked the medic with difficulty, Do you feel anything? There seemed to be raindrops just now. At this moment. Chapter 1484. It's not an illusion, it's really raining. Qiguan Rang, who was always calm, did not care that the medics were still bandaging his wounds. He suddenly raised his hands high and pretended to catch the rain. The rain changed very quickly. At first it was a drizzle, but soon it became a torrential downpour, drenching him from head to toe. Qiguan Rang did not care about his current embarrassing appearance. He could not help but hold his knees with both hands and bend over to laugh. He laughed so hard that he almost cried. On the other side, Sun Wen also ran into the rain. His eyes were filled with shock and surprise. He could not believe what he saw. Grandpa. Sun Lan secretly ran over because she was worried about Sun Wen. She happened to see her grandfather running into the rain. The rain is so heavy. Why don't you find a place to hide? An old man's body was incomparable to a young man's. Sun Lan was really worried that his grandfather would fall ill in the rain. He could not take the shock. He used the umbrella in his hand to shelter Sun Wen from the rain. He did not care that most of his clothes were wet. Sun Lan said, "I'll take you to shelter from the rain first. I'll cook a bowl of ginger soup later to ward off the cold." Sun Wen laughed heartily as he gave his grandson a tight hug. He patted his grandson's back and said with a smile, "Today was really a joyous day. This rain couldn't have come at a better time. Ha ha ha. I can't wait to see how ugly Niel Yang and the others' faces are." Sun Wen and the Nye family had a deep grudge. Even if Niel Yang was not a real enemy, he was still a disciple of the Nye family. They were on opposing sides. It was hard to say who would win the battle that day, but Niel Yang set a big fire before he left, which made Jiang Pingji's side very embarrassed. Who knew that even the heavens could not stand it anymore? It rained heavily in time, and suppressed the rapid fire. It was simply rain from the gods. Sun Wen had not laughed so freely in a long time since he left Zhongzhou and came to Dongqing. Sun Lan felt a lump in her throat when she heard her grandfather being so happy. After much persuasion, the old man was finally appeased. When the grandfather and grandson went to the commander's tent, they happened to meet Qiguan Rang, who came in the rain. Sun Wen exchanged greetings with him, smiled, and modestly offered a few pleasantries. Sun Lan could not help but say, "Even if you want to be modest, wait until you enter the main tent. You'll probably have to drink a few bowls of ginger soup." After he finished speaking, Qiguan Rang and Sun Lan entered the commander's tent with smiles. He was chased out by Jiang Pingji not long after he entered. "There's nothing urgent right now. You should at least change into a clean set of clothes first. Aren't you afraid of being rude?" Jiang Pingji sent them out to change their clothes. She then asked the soldiers to cook a big pot of ginger soup to ward off the cold. The heavy rain came quickly. Many people were completely drenched before they could react. Jiang Pingji waited for a while before the marshal's tent was slowly filled with people. As the defending party, the casualties on Jiang Pingji's side were not small, and the losses were even greater. After all, arrows could be recycled. When cleaning up the battlefield, not only did they have to clean up the corpses, but they also had to recycle the arrows. Otherwise, based on the scale of 100,000 people, who knew how many arrows would be used to fight a battle? Who could afford to waste so many arrows? If one side won, not only would they be able to retrieve their own arrows, but they would also be able to retrieve the enemy's arrows and increase their military resources. If Niel Yang retreated obediently, Jiang Pingji could send people out of the city to clean up the battlefield and recover the usable resources. In the end, Niel Yang burned everything down with a big fire. He admitted his loss, but Jiang Pingji's loss could not be recovered. All in all, she suffered a great loss in this defensive battle. If it was not for the rain that struck the enemy's morale and public opinion, she would be even more depressed. Jiang Pingji was depressed, but Niel Yang was so angry that he vomited blood. The Nye army retreated and left, returning to the camp in a grandiose manner. Not long after they arrived at the camp, Niel Yang's son, Nye Qing, led a group of officials who had stayed behind to welcome Niel Yang. Niel Yang had just dismounted from the horse's back when he suddenly felt something cold on the back of his hand. What was this feeling? Not long after, another drop of water dripped on the back of his hand. He then knew that it was not an illusion. Looking at the drop of water, Niel Yang's heart tightened. His face was as pale as a wall that had been painted white. "Father, what's wrong?" Nye Qing stood on the right to support Niel Yang, while Wei Dan stood on the left to take care of him. "This is rain." Wei Dan raised his hand, and a few drops of rain fell on his palm. His phoenix eyes gradually widened, and his eyes were filled with shock and disbelief. Nye Qing did not understand. He felt for a while and said, "It's indeed raining. It's normal to rain at this time of year." He found that after he finished speaking, his father Niel Yang's arm was stiff, as though he was forcefully holding on to something. "Father?" Nye Qing asked. Niel Yang's expression turned livid. Caught off guard, he spat out a large mouthful of blood, and his body fell backwards. Nye Qing was so shocked by this turn of events that he did not know how to react. It was Wei Dan who went forward to catch Niel Yang and quickly helped him up. "Quick!" Wei Dan was so frightened that cold sweat broke out on his forehead. His refined voice cracked and was filled with panic. Quick, call the doctor. Many of Nieliang's confidants knew that his body was not well, and a small number of people had also seen some clues. However, he was extremely calm in front of others. This was the first time he had spat out blood and fainted in front of others. It would not take long for the news to spread throughout the camp. Nieliang was furious this time. Even a normal person would be injured, let alone a patient like him. The doctor had used all his strength to save him, and had even used strong medicine to keep him alive. Seeing this, everyone broke out in a cold sweat for him. Do your best and leave it to the heavens. If he does not wake up tomorrow, I'm afraid. The white-haired and bearded doctor shook his head and sighed heavily. Everyone's hearts sank when they saw this. After this torment, it was already late at night. The heavy rain had finally stopped, and the puddles on the ground were filled with rainwater. Nie Qingyi took care of the seriously ill Nieliang, his eyes bloodshot. Nieliang frowned when he saw this. He said sincerely, "Elder brother, uncle will definitely be able to turn this into safety." Nie Qing knelt by Nieliang's bed, his face full of self-blame. He had learned of the situation at the front lines from the generals, who had participated in the battle, and understood why his father had spat out blood after the rain. The heavens were on the enemy's side. A heavy rain had ruined Nieliang's plans. How could he not be furious and spit out blood? Nieliang said, "This matter is clearly Lu Shi's fault. Elder brother, why do you blame yourself? If uncle knew, he would definitely be displeased and scold you. How could a man be so indecisive?" Nieliang vomiting blood. In the end it had nothing to do with Nie Qing. What was he blaming himself for? Nie Qing said, "I would rather father wake up and scold me, or ask for the family rules, than watch him struggle on the line between life and death." Nieliang did not say anything else. He only stayed by Nie Qing's side silently. The system's cold sarcasm entered his ears. Nie Qing must be extremely touched by you right now. It's a pity. Who would know that you were the main culprit who harmed Nieliang? Nieliang did not show it on his face, but he laughed coldly in his heart. Shut up. Why would the system listen? Ever since it ruthlessly punished Nieliang, their roles had been swapped. Chapter 1485. The matter of Nieliang vomiting blood and fainting was suppressed by Wei Yong. Any soldier who dared to talk about it in private would be punished. After a series of harsh measures, the unstable morale of the army temporarily calmed down. But everyone knew that it was only temporary. There were 70,000 soldiers who participated in the battle during the day. These people had witnessed how the fire at Zhangjiang Pass started, and knew how the fire was extinguished. Even God did not give them face, and stood on the enemy's side. They were very flustered and worried about their future. Fighting with people was endless joy. But wasn't fighting with God courting death? That night, many people were so worried that they could not sleep well. Nieliang also woke up in the early morning. He clearly felt that his body was much heavier than before, and he had no strength in his entire body. As soon as he turned his head, he saw his tired son lying on the side of the bed. Another person called Nieliang was also lying on the side and sleeping soundly. "My lord is awake?" Wei Yong noticed that his lord was awake immediately, and his anxious mood instantly calmed down. Nieliang used his eyes to signal Wei Yong to speak softly, so as not to wake Nie Qing. He closed his eyes and thought about the reason for his coma. He sighed and asked, "What was the situation after I fainted?" Wei Yong said, "There was no movement on Lu Shi's side. Some soldiers in the camp spread rumors, and dealt with it immediately. The morale of the army could not be shaken. Once it was shaken, the war would not be easy to fight." Nieliang said weakly, "Despite all the calculations, I didn't expect God to be on her side. She calculated the hearts of men, but she lacked a trace of God's will. After all, he was an ancient person. He did not know that the fire would heat up the air on the ground, and cause it to expand and rise. He also did not know that the air above would contract and sink. The two would cause the water vapor in the air to condense into clouds and mist. Recently, the weather was about to rain. Nieliang's fire only brought the rain forward. Not knowing this, Nieliang would naturally attribute this coincidental rain to God's will like the others." Wei Yong said, My lord, why do you say such depressing words? So what if it's God's will? Everything depends on human effort. Nieliang smiled weakly. You're right. He had never been a person who believed in fate, but this coincidence made him crazy. My lord, please rest for a while. I will call the doctor over now. Niang was shrouded in a layer of haze, but Jiang Pingji, who was his opponent, could not cheer up. On the contrary, she flipped over the bronze table in anger. Bai Ning immediately stepped forward to plead for leniency. My lord, please calm your anger. This general thinks that there are many suspicious points in this matter. We might as well return and continue the interrogation. He had no choice but to stand up. His daughter, Bai Yuexia, was also involved in the leak of the carpentry workshop's secrets. He had never seen his lord so angry before. He was so scared that his liver trembled. Jiang Pingji suppressed her anger and did not continue tormenting the bronze table. Perhaps she would not have the chance to do so in the future. Why? The bronze table covered with his lord's handprints was bent in her rage. Aside from Bai Ning, there were also others who stood up to plead for Zhang Ping, Xiao Guang, and the others. Jiang Pingji's anger was too terrifying. They were really worried that their lord would order the execution of the three of them in a fit of anger. Why did he want to kill them? Because many of the carpentry workshop's secrets were leaked? Zhang Ping and the other two were implicated. Old man Sun Wen wanted to say a few words to persuade Jiang Pingji to punish them lightly and spare their lives. Out of the corner of his eye, he saw that Wei Ci was as still as a mountain. He could not help but frown. Zhang Ping and Wei Ci were close friends. The former was in trouble, but the latter did not say anything. Either Wei Ci was clean and gave up on his friend Zhang Ping, refusing to plead for him and sully himself, or Wei Ci was confident that nothing would happen to Zhang Ping and the others. Sun Wen glanced at Qiguan Rang again and found that he was also as calm as Mount Tai. He held his newly made feather fan and closed his eyes in deep thought. Well, it looked like it was the latter. That was the truth. Although Jiang Pingji was angry, she did not plan to do anything to Zhang Ping and the others, let alone order their execution. She calmed her anger and glanced at the messenger. She said, Tell me everything in detail. The matter was simple. Because of Zhang Ping and the others' negligence, a spy had infiltrated the carpentry workshop. The spy had a photographic memory and had quietly stolen several confidential drawings from the carpentry workshop. For several years, no clues had been found. It was only recently that a flaw was revealed. The spy was ready to slip away. He found an excuse that his mother was sick and asked Zhang Ping for a 7-day leave to visit his family. However, the spy did not return after 7 days. Zhang Ping was worried and sent someone to check the spy's address. Only then did he find that the house was empty. If that was the case, he would at most be suspicious. However, Zhang Ping found a fragment of old and yellowed rice paper in a bird's nest near the house. Although the fragment was only a small corner, Zhang Ping could still recognize that it was part of the design of a new crossbow that had been developed a while ago. He immediately became suspicious and ordered people to search everywhere. Finally, they found a few relatively complete drawings in the house of a sluggard nearby. The sluggard said, When that Mr. packed his things and left, he threw a pile of paper into the charcoal basin. I secretly stole some of them and hid them in my house. There are even words on them. When my son grows up, he can learn a word or two. Sir, I'm really not a thief. Zhang Ping felt dizzy when he heard this. The carpentry workshop had strict rules. No drawings could be taken out, and the confidential contents would be backed up and hidden in a secret storeroom. The storeroom had 3 locks, and only he, Xiao Guang, and Bai Yuexia could open it with the keys. The storeroom was heavily guarded, and there hadn't been any unusual movements recently. The only explanation was that the spy had secretly recorded the drawings and made a copy when he came back. Zhang Ping realized that the situation wasn't good and immediately reported this matter to Su Ku, Feng Jin, and the others. On one hand, they sent troops to kill the spy, and on the other, they carefully investigated the truth of the matter. This spy was a member of the Mo family who had sought refuge with Zhang Ping many years ago. Because Zhang Ping disliked his ability, He had never been put in an important position. Later, the spy was transferred to Xiao Guang's side. Xiao Guang had a good temper and would occasionally give the spy some work. The real reason this spy was promoted was because of Bai Yuexia. Bai Yuexia had discovered that the spy had a photographic memory. Although this person's talent was weak and his creative ability was lacking, he was honest, loyal, and willing to endure hardships. After a few years of experience, he slowly climbed up. After accumulating enough experience, Bai Yuexia would occasionally guide him, and the spy once again entered the eyes of Zhang Ping and Xiao Guang. For the past year, the spy had participated in the remodeling design and was qualified to access the confidential drawings, so he secretly made a copy. Because Zhang Ping and the others would update the drawings at any time and make changes to the details, the spy had quite a few copies. He took the final version of the draft and burned the rest, but he didn't expect a nearby sluggard to intercept a part of it. Jiang Pingji continued to ask about the spy, such as his name, background, and ancestral home. On the other side, Wei Si's brows furrowed more tightly as he listened. He had never thought that the spy would be this person. Shi Zhong, an ordinary name, was a typical example of a person who was unknown throughout his life. However, he had an extraordinary and extremely famous wife, Bai Yuexia. Yes, in her previous life, Bai Yuexia's husband was Shi Zhong. Chapter 1486. May fall in love with you. Oh no, the streamer hates betrayal the most, not to mention betraying her with a bunch of confidential drawings. Xiankyo. TSK. How is this betrayal? She has a boss, so she's a spy. If she doesn't care about her boss, but works hard for the streamer instead, that's abnormal, isn't it? However, this operation is indeed disgusting. Although the salted fish were always complaining about Jiang Pengji's bad luck, if she really encountered something that didn't go her way, the salted fish were even more furious than she was. The streamer in front of them is their 5 million salted fish coach. No one can bully her except them. Tangled Pegasus. Sigh, am I the only one worried about Zhang Ping and the other two? Although this was done by a spy, they are also responsible for their negligence. The missing drawings are most likely a military secret. These charges are probably not easy to get away with. Because Zhang Ping and the others were technical geeks and engineering students, they rarely appeared in front of Jiang Pingji, and the salted fish rarely saw them. Even so, the salted fish still quite liked the three, and there were also spontaneously organized fan groups among the people. Zhang Ping and the others made a big mistake, and the salted fish could not help but feel worried for them. When Bai Ning and the others pleaded for mercy, some salted fish also echoed and pleaded for mercy. Some salted fish even suggested crowdfunding to reduce the punishment. However, a few salted fish bosses saw it clearly. Not to that extent. The charge of inadequate supervision can be serious or minor. It all depends on the streamer's choice. Zhang Ping and the others did not collude with the spy, and the streamer has been vigorously supporting technological research and development. She will most likely be lenient. While the salted fish argued endlessly, Jiang Pingji also made a statement. She fined Zhang Ping and the others a year's salary. It was a small punishment but a big warning. At the same time, she asked the three to reflect on their actions and settle the score when they returned. For three highly paid personnel, this little punishment was really just a drizzle. Bai Ning secretly heaved a sigh of relief and stopped pleading for his daughter, lest it backfire and make the Lord hate him. He changed the topic at the right time and turned his gaze to the spy named Shi Zhong. He must catch him and punish him, Jiang Pingji said expressionlessly. How can it be so easy to catch him and punish him? We still don't know who Shi Zhong is working for. Even though Feng Jin, Su Ku, and the others had immediately sent troops to capture them, they were too late. The golden period had long passed. Because there was no progress in the pursuit, they could only quickly order the various checkpoints to pay attention to suspicious people. They would rather catch 1,000 wrongly than let one go. When Shi Zhong's news reached Jiang Pingji, there was no news of the spy anywhere. It was as if he had vanished from the face of the earth. Everyone could only speculate which faction Shi Zhong belonged to based on the clues left behind. Shi Zhong's case was very serious, but Jiang Pingji was at the front line. She had no extra energy to look for a needle in a haystack. After discussing for a while, everyone dispersed. Wei Xi took a stroll outside and returned. Jiang Pingji said, "Aren't you burying your head in the sand? Apart from a few people with bad eyesight, and a few people with no brains, who doesn't know that you and I have been in cahoots for a long time? If you go out for a spin and come back, it will give people the feeling that you're hiding something and make them suspicious." When Wei Xi heard the words hooking up and committing adultery, he immediately felt that his lord needed to take up some cultural lessons. "I know that person called Shi Zhong." Wei Xi coughed softly and briefly explained the reason for his visit. "What? You know him? Why didn't you say it just now?" Jiang Pingji knew the reason after thinking for a while. "It's inconvenient to say?" Wei Xi knew him, but it was inconvenient to say it. The only explanation was that he knew Shi Zhong in his previous life. "It's indeed inconvenient. Although we don't have any interaction in this life, we met a few times in our previous life. I know a little." In this life, Wei Xi and Shi Zhong did not have any interaction at all. He could not possibly use the excuse of calculating with his fingers and observing the sky at night to fool people. He continued, "Shi Zhong's ancestral home is in Zhongzhou Maozhou. Because of his inelegant appearance and short stature, he was rejected to become an official. In this era, one could not become an official just by having talent and background. It also depended on one's height, appearance, physical disability, and skin that was exposed. In short, if one did not look good, he would not be qualified to become an official. He could only be an ordinary person for the rest of his life. Even if there were other ways to become an official, he would most likely not be put in an important position. He would be mediocre for the rest of his life, and would not be able to stand out. Yes, the world that valued appearance was that cruel. As a member of the club that did not meet the standards for looks, Shi Zhong's experience was naturally bumpy. He first sought refuge with the local gentry family in Maozhou as a guest. Because he was ugly and had no ability, he sat on the bench for a year. They did not want to keep a freeloader, so they tactfully chased him away. Shi Zhong could only look for another family. Finally, under the recommendation of a friend, he entered the Wei family in Bianzhou and became a guest. The Wei family in Bianzhou? Isn't that the birthplace of your ancestral home? Wei Xi nodded and replied, "My ancestor was indeed a branch of the Wei family in Bianzhou, and finally settled in Lengyi County. However, the branch in Lengyi County moved back to Bianzhou 10 years ago, in order to protect the descendants of the family. This is also a way out." In her previous life, Wei Xi followed them to Zhongzhou at that time. In this life, he rejected it and stayed in Lengyi County with a few servants. Jiang Pingji nodded and did not interrupt. Wei Xi continued, "The Wei family in Bianzhou have many handsome men. With Shi Zhong's looks and talents, he became a guest under the Wei family. One can imagine his situation." Jiang Pingji looked at Wei Xi's face. She deeply agreed with the phrase, "The Wei family has many handsome men." In that case, the person who sent him to be a spy is very likely to be your elder brother? Jiang Pingji remembered that the Wei family was considered a first-class gentry family in Bianzhou. A few years ago, the Wei family's status was not as high as it was now. They had no right to order the Wei family's guest to be a spy. After thinking about it, she found a possibility. Shi Zhong was sent by Wei Qiong. "My lord's guess coincides with mine," Wei Xi said. "In fact, Shi Zhong was one of my elder brother's men in my previous life." Of course, Shi Zhong did not have the opportunity to be a spy in his previous life. When their emperor attacked Zhongzhou, Nieliang had already knelt down. His elder brother Wei Qiong had been depressed for many years and passed away before he was 50. What abilities does Shi Zhong have? Wei Xi smiled and said, "He doesn't have many abilities. He just has a good memory, good handwriting, and looks honest on the outside. My elder brother in my previous life took a fancy to this. That's why he let Shi Zhong stay by his side to help organize the documents. Occasionally, he would write and correct some chores. Shi Zhong has never stood out in his life. His mother has a stubborn personality. She chased away a few daughters-in-law and insisted that her son marry a good one. Jiang Pingji frowned. Who did Shi Zhong marry in the end? Wei Xi said. General Bai Ning's only daughter, Bai Yuexia. How can that be? I don't have much contact with Bai Yuexia, but I know that she has a strong temperament. How could she fall for such a person? Chapter 1487. Wei Xi also smiled bitterly. Regarding this point, he vaguely heard the reason from Her Majesty. There were no more than 3 reasons why Bai Yuexia chose Shi Zhong. First, Shi Zhong knew how to please his father-in-law and increase Bai Ning's favorability. Second, Bai Yuexia also felt that she should have a child to continue the bloodline and let her father, Bai Ning, feel more at ease in his old age. Third, Shi Zhong was a man with no ability and was easy to bully. No matter how much he roared or barked, he was still the same. When all men are men, there is only one father. What the ancients said makes some sense. In summary, Bai Yuexia was willing to end her single life only for her old father, Bai Ning. There were many men in the world who could be a husband, but there was only one father. How could the two be compared? It was not appropriate for him to say these details, so he just vaguely explained the general situation. He said, Bai Yuexia was almost 30 in her previous life, but she still refused to get married. General Bai Ning was very worried. Shi Zhong was forced by his mother, and somehow, he set his eyes on her, hoping that Bai Yuexia could help him in his career. Shi Zhong was self-aware and did not take the initiative to approach the girl. Instead, he took a detour to look for General Bai Ning. After a while, he had a good impression of her. Shi Zhong pretended to be good before marriage, but after a few years of marriage, he revealed his true nature. He could not tolerate his wife being in a high position and humiliating his dignity as a husband. Jiang Pingji laughed. That's funny. On one hand, he wants his wife to help him, but on the other hand, he can't tolerate his wife being in a higher position than him. What does that mean? Does he think that if Bai Yuexia helped him and gave him a chance, he would be able to rise to the top? Doesn't he have any idea what kind of qualifications he has? Wei Xi said, there are many people in this world who are more ambitious than the sky. Maybe that's what he thinks. In the end, Bai Yuexia and Shi Zhong were married for a few years and had 2 children. Shi Zhong was still a small official who could not be put in an important position, but Bai Yuexia's career became smoother and smoother. She became the Minister of Works, one of the 6 ministries. Everyone in the imperial court knew that Bai Yuexia had a good-for-nothing husband. When his colleagues gathered together, there were always people who teased or ridiculed Shi Zhong, asking him why, as the head of the family, he couldn't control his wife. Shi Zhong had long held a grudge against Bai Yuexia for not doing her best to support him. Now he was even more furious and jealous. He did not know when it started, but Shi Zhong started to wander around the red light district. The first time he went there, his colleague informed Bai Yuexia. Bai Yuexia waited for him to return to the mansion and interrogate him. Shi Zhong knew his colleague's secret and was ashamed and angry. He lost his composure and wanted to use domestic violence. As the daughter of a general, how could Bai Yuexia be at a disadvantage? On the contrary, it was Shi Zhong who was beaten black and blue by her, crying and wailing. After learning the whole story of her son's beating, Shi Zhong's mother secretly urged Bai Yuexia to resign from her position and stay at home to serve her husband and teach her son. Shi Zhong's mother pushed and fought, and Bai Yuexia had a miscarriage. She didn't know she was pregnant until she miscarried. Jiang Pingji said, in this world, other than blood-related men and married men, what man can't be a husband? She can actually tolerate it? Wei Xi said, of course she didn't. Coincidentally, Her Majesty was implementing the one family, 2 households system. She used her official position to force Shi Zhong to agree. She originally wanted to register both children into her family and then prepare for a divorce. However, Shi Zhong and his mother refused to agree, and the law did not support Bai Yuexia's taking the 2 children, so she took her eldest daughter away. This daughter is very promising, but that son was raised to be useless. Bai Yuexia's eldest daughter, was chosen to be the study companion of the crown prince, Jiang Yan. Looking at the relationship between the two children, they would definitely be the left and right arms of the young emperor in the future. Bai Yuexia's son was raised to be arrogant and willful by Shi Zhong and his mother. After Shi Zhong remarried, his wife maliciously praised him to death. When the child was 15 years old, he fought with others and rode a horse to race. He trampled 6 people to death and was finally sentenced to death. Jiang Pingji was not surprised. Shi Zhong and his mother are not good. How can they teach their child well, under the influence of what they see and hear? Wei Xi said, "That child, I'm afraid his innate talent is not good. He takes after his father." Before Bai Yuexia divorced, she was the one who raised the child. Not long after the divorce, Bai Yuexia found out about her son's situation in the residence. She wanted to raise him, but unexpectedly, the child pointed his finger at his biological mother and insulted her, comparing her to a prostitute. Bai Yuexia was so angry that she completely gave up on this son and refused to acknowledge him anymore. Of course, in the end, she was the one who sent people to the market to collect her son's corpse. Their mother-son relationship was limited to that. Shi Zhong is really a bad person. After he separated from Bai Yuexia, he often referred to himself as the husband of the Minister of Works. Usually, he would drink with his scoundrels and gossip about Bai Yuexia's private affairs. He often visited brothels and his mother slandered and insulted him everywhere. Officials were very concerned about their reputation. No matter what happened internally, their reputation must not be tainted on the surface. If Bai Yuexia was not trusted by Her Majesty, and she was usually cautious and reliable, she would probably be depressed by the imperial censor's criticism. Wei Xi said, "I thought that Bai Yuexia had long entered the Lord's tent, and she would not meet Shi Zhong. I didn't expect to meet him in this way." Jiang Pingji said, "Maybe this is called fate. Even if it's fate, it's an ill-fated relationship." Wei Xi sighed. "Compared to Shi Zhong, I think Xihing is better. It's a pity that Xihing has worked with her for several years, but they still address each other as colleagues. There doesn't seem to be any romantic feelings between them. If the two of them can get married, it will be perfect." Zhang Ping was fated to have a plum wife and a crane son in his previous life. This was also his pursuit, so Wei Xi could not persuade him otherwise. In this life, he saw that Zhang Ping's obsession with being single for the rest of his life was not very deep. Perhaps there was a chance, Jiang Pingji said. "If you were an iceman, I'm afraid you would starve to death." Wei Xi asked, "Why?" Jiang Pingji said, "Matchmaking is also a skill. How can I mess around like you?" Wei Xi held back his laughter and said, "I hope that my lord can point out the right path." Jiang Pingji said as if she had been through it. "To deal with this kind of situation, you should get straight to the point. Don't pretend to be ambiguous. Ask them what their impression of each other is, and whether they are willing to lie in the same coffin after 100 years. Won't that solve the problem?" Wei Xi was speechless. Wasn't this too simple and crude? "I'll go back and try. Maybe I can be a matchmaker. I haven't been to a wedding for a long time." Jiang Pingji hesitated for a while and said, "Wait. Why do you want to matchmake Xihing and Yuexia, and not someone else?" "It's not that I'm biased, but Xihing has a dignified appearance. If he has the intention to get married, I'm afraid that his family's doorstep will be flattened by icemen. The possibility of him choosing Yuexia doesn't seem high." Wei Xi held back his laughter and said, "Xihing doesn't rely on a face to distinguish beauty from ugliness, he relies on his hands." Because of this strange illness, others thought that Zhang Ping was arrogant and difficult to get along with. Wei Xi was one of the few friends he had. He took the initiative to get to know Wei Xi only because he had a pair of hands that made people fall in love at first sight. Chapter 1488. So he's face blind. Based on his situation, it's indeed difficult for him to find someone he likes. After all, no one knew what kind of hands Zhang Ping liked. No matter how good-looking Wei Xi's hands were, they belonged to someone. They couldn't give them away. Wei Xi said, "My lord, why don't you send someone to guard the mountains near Zhanjiang Pass? Maybe there will be some gains." Since Shizhong was sent by Wei Si's elder brother, Wei Dan, he would definitely find a way to hand the things over to Wei Dan after stealing the secrets. At this time, Wei Dan was in the Nya camp outside the pass. Shizhong would definitely not go far. He would most likely cross the border nearby and sneak in. Jiang Pingji nodded. I understand. Later, send someone to guard and arrest any suspicious people. Since the end of the siege, the troops of the two armies had not moved. Nya Liang needed to recuperate, and Jiang Pingji needed to reorganize the troops. She counted with her fingers. The supplies sent by the logistics were almost here. Time passed in a flash. The new episode of Dream of 1,000 Years began the lucky draw. The 5 million salted fish rubbed their hands excitedly. Yen Rian. Make another wish. I'm willing to exchange 15 pounds of meat for a dream of 1,000 years! Tong Meng. I also make a wish. I'm willing to exchange Tang Qi for a dream of 1,000 years! Fu Duo. Choose me. I woke up early today to go to Jinshan Temple to pray. I'm very devout. Looking at the screen full of prayers and metaphysics, Jiang Pingji sighed and pressed the lucky draw button. Countless salted fish IDs flashed in the center of the screen. After a minute, there was a beep. The lucky emperor was born. Lan Shui Yubuja. Me. It's actually me. I'm so lucky. Goodbye, I'm going to cross over. The lucky emperor was so excited that he was incoherent. The other salted fish felt sour in their hearts and roared angrily. Bah! Because of the previous lucky emperor strategy posts, the salted fish were seriously prepared, regardless of whether they were lucky enough to cross over. Maybe one day they would be lucky enough to cross over. The new lucky emperor happily ran to her Simon's bed. She did not take off her clothes or shoes. She lay flat on the bed and closed her eyes. Not long after, she felt a sense of weightlessness, as if she had flown into the sky. When she opened her eyes, the scenery around her had changed greatly. She was not lying on a spring mattress, but wild grass and gravel. No way, so unlucky. A slightly deep male voice escaped from his throat, scaring her into covering her mouth. After a while, she carefully moved her other hand down to his Adam's apple, and then down to his flat chest. She continued to move down, and her face turned red as she let go of her hand. Oh my! Not only did he come to the wilderness, he even turned into a man. She mumbled as she looked around, and found a screen floating in the air. The screen was filled with comments from the salted fish. Since she had read the previous European Emperor's Guide, she accepted it very well, and did not make a fuss about it. Hi everyone! Baby is the new lucky king. Acting cute, #carrot. Carrot hashtag. Unexpectedly, the salted fishes didn't buy it at all. They all sent vomiting emojis. Tudafaccio. Find a puddle and look at yourself. Don't act cute if your looks aren't good enough. It hurts my eyes. Jingying. It's not too ugly, but it's below the standard of a normal person. The killing power of acting cute is comparable to Sister Feng, who just debuted. The salted fishes chatted one after another. The European emperor couldn't help but raise his hand to touch his face and look for a puddle. I was scared to death. She was so scared that she half squatted and jumped to the side. This is deep in the forest. My luck is too bad. Do I have to stay here for the precious 12 hours? It had been raining heavily outside, and the man's clothes were wet. His face looked sickly, and it was obvious that he had been sick. She turned around and carried the man's luggage and bookcase on her back, so that the original owner wouldn't wake up and find his belongings gone. As a good baby who had grown up in the new era, she couldn't cause trouble for others even if she had transmigrated. I've transmigrated. I can't go back without even seeing an ancient person. That's too much. She cheered herself on. In order to reduce her fear, she forced herself to think of messy things. For example, she started to run wildly while walking. You guys don't know that before I transmigrated, I was in a cup, so I didn't know how painful it was for a girl with big boobs to run 800 meters. Later, my childhood friend told me that if a man ran naked, it would be painful. Now I've finally experienced it. The ancient people really didn't have underwear. The thing between their legs swung when they ran, and the faster they ran, the more painful it was. Tong Tong's girl. You're indeed an old lady. I admit defeat. With the salted fishes joking around, the European emperor was not very afraid. But that was all. Not long after, Jiang Pingji sent a bullet scream. Don't go forward. Stop and step back. There are snakes in front. Oh my. The European emperor was so scared that her whole body trembled. She was most afraid of snakes. She took a closer look and saw a few snakes coiled on the tree in front of her. She stepped back carefully and was so scared that tears came out of her eyes. The system considerately gave her an electronic map. The red dots on it meant that there were dangerous beasts. The European emperor only needed to put her hand on the red dots to see the species of the beasts. A rough scan showed that 70% of them were snakes. The density of snakes in the wild was too high, wasn't it? But it made sense. In her era, the number of humans had skyrocketed, squeezing too much living space. Snakes had no habitat, so it was a problem for them to reproduce and survive. It was different in ancient times. The number of humans was small, and there were many habitats in the wild. Snakes could restrain humans, so the density was naturally high. Careful to avoid dangerous creatures, she climbed down the mountain stumbling. She didn't know if the man climbed over the mountain and wanted to go down, or if he had just climbed a few dozen meters. Anyway, she refused to stay in the forest with wild beasts. After spending more than an hour, she finally went down the mountain. Oh my, there's smoke over there. It's almost noon. She could vaguely see smoke rising from the horizon, and she could vaguely see the outline of some buildings. Her heart was moved. She opened her arms and hugged the sky. She felt better than ever. Jiang Pengji was speechless. Wait a minute. The environment that this lucky emperor was in seemed a little familiar. At that moment, Jiang Pengji felt that the camp was boring. She randomly found an excuse to patrol the camp, and the two of them took a walk on horseback. Of course, to ensure safety, there were hundreds of guards following behind them. While they were chatting, they paid attention to the European emperor in the streaming room, in case the child was stopped by the poisonous snakes. Little Erlang, carry your school bag to school. The European emperor hummed a nursery rhyme and found a white horse and a red dress reflected on the stream not far away. Because this body was short-sighted, she couldn't see very clearly. Who is it? Accompanied by the pleasant and somewhat familiar male voice, she heard the sound of a sharp sword being unsheathed. She panicked. In the blink of an eye, the sharp sword in Wei Si's hand was already against her neck. CI. Beauty CI. Oh my, she won the lottery. Chapter 1489. Beauty CI. Wei Ci did not know if she was referring to him, but just the word beauty was enough to make him angry. No matter how well-mannered Wei Ci was, he could not hold it in any longer. He angrily rebuked, Lecher. De Lecher? The salted fish lucky king could not help but exclaim. Even scolding people sounds so nice. Jiang Pingji knew very well that even though she said that Wei Ci's martial arts skills were at the level of a small class of square dancers, it was not a problem for him to deal with an empty-handed salted fish who was obsessed with beauty. If salted fish was allowed to do as he pleased, Wei Ci might not be able to hold back and stab someone to death. Zixia, what's wrong? Jiang Pengji clamped the horse's abdomen and walked forward leisurely. White snorted and did as she said. It looked extremely docile. Hearing these words, the salted fish lucky king could not help but look at the newcomer. Because she was short-sighted, she couldn't see clearly at first. She only saw a red shadow on a white horse approaching her. When the other party arrived in front of her, four words suddenly popped up in her mind. Fresh clothes and furious horses. The woman on the back of the horse was dressed in red, and there was a faint smile on her handsome face. The white horse she was riding on was snow white from head to toe, and there was not a single flaw on it. The salted fish European king stood rooted to the ground. He stared at the screen for a long time, and his brain froze for a moment. Unbeknownst to him, the live stream was already bursting at the seams. Countless unlucky people were wailing in anguish, passionately portraying what it meant to be envious, jealous, and hateful. Tuta Faccio. This is a historic moment. I never thought that salted fish would have the chance to be in the same frame as the host. Yiwu Yenling, I'm so jealous. Why is it that when I transmigrated, I was so far away from the host, but when she transmigrated, she had the opportunity to meet the host couple. It was heartbreaking enough to see the guy who ate by rubbing his feet, but he didn't expect this guy to be the real deal. Guikai Guofeng Xiao. Did you guys notice that each time I transmigrated, the luckier one by one? Does this mean that the next time I transmigrate, I will have the chance to collect all the illustrated achievements, get the signatures of all the members, and walk to the peak of life with antiques in my pocket? Kojiaoqi fan. Wash up and go to sleep. Everything is possible in daydreams. While the salted fishes were boiling with excitement, the target of their envy was facing a test of life and death. Wei Si's hand that was holding the sword was very steady. The salted fish lucky queen did not dare to move, for fear that the other party's hand would slip and stab her. Big brother, let's sit down and talk. Don't play around with weapons. That's not in line with the core values of socialism. The salted fish lucky emperor knew his place. He knew that his address just now had offended Wei Si, so he could only change the way he addressed Wei Si with tears in his eyes. Wei Si did not listen to her explanation and answered Jiang Pingji's question. My lord, this person's behavior is impetuous, his words are frivolous, and his actions are also suspicious. Why don't we bring him down for interrogation? The salted fish lucky king could not help but shed 2 streams of tears. I've been a fan of you for so many years. As my idol, you actually treat your fans like this. Sad QAQ Jiang Pengji dismounted from the horse and resisted the urge to smile. Forget it. He looks like a hunter who lives a hard life. Put away your sword first. Look, he's so scared that he's about to cry. Wei Si did as he was told and skillfully sheathed the snow-white sword. When the salted fish lucky queen saw this, she secretly swallowed a mouthful of saliva. She decided to take back her label of Wei Si as a weakling. Who are you? Jiang Pingji asked with a pleasant expression. The salted fish lucky queen's eyes darted around. When she saw the system's notification, she secretly heaved a sigh of relief. I'm a hunter from the nearby mountains. Greetings, my lord. She stuttered as she spoke. Her posture of cupping her fists was also very awkward. Instead, she portrayed the image of a hunter who had not seen the world. Wei Si glanced at the books and luggage that she was carrying and said indifferently, a bunch of nonsense. This person's image was quite in line with the image of a hunter, but the things that he was carrying were not what a hunter should have. The salted fish lucky queen looked at Wei Si with a wronged expression. She was answering according to the system's notification. Could it be that the system was making fun of her? Wei Si asked. You said that you're a hunter. Then whose things do you have on you belong to? When the salted fish lucky queen heard Wei Si's question, she suddenly had the illusion that her heart was beating 70 beats per minute. If Jiang Pingji was not by her side, she really wanted to pounce on Wei Si and hug him. Even if she would be stabbed a few times by the other party, it would be worth it. Even if she died under a peony flower, she would still be a romantic ghost. I have these things. The salted fish lucky queen could not help but glance at the system's notification. After she saw it clearly, she almost cursed it out loud. At the same time, she blamed herself for being careless. Why? Because the luggage did not belong to this body at all. I picked up these luggage. The salted fish lucky queen stuttered. Her entire face looked even more aggrieved and pitiful, as if she was about to cry in the next second. I really picked them up. I saw that the luggage was on the ground, and no one wanted it, so I took it. However, Wei Si said, picked up? There were not many households near Zhanjiang Pass. After the war started, the evacuation of the people was hastened. Now that it's in the wilderness, where did you pick up these things? Could it be that the nearby bandits were tempted by the wealth and killed to steal it? The salted fish lucky queen watched as Wei Si placed his right hand on the hilt of his sword. Her legs turned to jelly. Why did Beauty Si guess so accurately? Yes, this body was actually a bandit who made a living by robbing people. There were 6 other accomplices. Since the war started at Zhanjiang Pass, the 6 accomplices were afraid of Jiang Pingji's power and influence. They secretly moved to another place. Only this body could not leave, because it had to take care of its elderly mother. Because there were no passers-by, the bandit had a hard time. He did not make any business for a few days. Yesterday he met a sloppy refugee. He followed him with a hatchet in his hand. It happened to be raining heavily. The bandit and the refugee were fighting. He thought that he could kill the person in a few moves. He did not expect the other party to be so stubborn that he would rather die than let go. In desperation, the bandit chopped randomly with the hatchet a few times. The heavy rain quickly calmed his feverish mind. He realized that it was very likely that he had killed someone. He was so scared that his legs turned to jelly. He turned to escape. The mountain road was rugged, and it was raining heavily. The bandit lost his footing and rolled down the mountain. When he woke up the next day, he had already become the salted fish lucky queen. The system gave a brief introduction, but the salted fish lucky queen only saw that the body was that of a bandit. She killed someone. Wei Xi used a sword to scare her. She shivered and confessed everything. Wei Xi's face was livid. Jiang Pingji, who was standing 2 steps away from him, secretly face-bombed. She was sure that the salted fish lucky queen was a good girl. She would confess whatever Wei Xi lied to her. In a more complicated environment, she would not survive more than 2 episodes. Jiang Pingji even covered up for her and said that she was a hunter who lived nearby. So, you really killed someone to steal their wealth? Wei Xi's left thumb pushed against the sword's guard. The snow-white blade was slightly unsheathed. Chapter 1490. She thought she was lucky enough to meet 2 of her idols. She didn't expect Wei Xi, one of her idols, to want to kill her. Was she going to be the first unlucky person to die in the hands of her idols in the history of Dream of 1,000 Years? The more she thought about it, the sadder she felt. The more she thought about it, the more she wanted to cry. At the critical moment when her life was threatened, she cried herself hoarse. Wei Xi was speechless. This bandit was not tall, but his muscles were solid. He belonged to the short and capable type, and he had a ferocious appearance. He didn't expect that the honorable person, who could cure children's cries at night, would have a cowardly and weak heart. He only said a few words, and the other party actually cried. No matter how bad Jiang Pingji's temperament was, she would not deliberately humiliate someone who treated her sincerely. The lucky guy in front of her was even her fan. Zixiao, why don't you send someone to investigate the things he robbed? Even though he is a robber who has done many evil things, his filial piety is commendable. The law is nothing more than human feelings. If you really want to punish him, you have to let him settle down his old mother at home first. We can't let the old lady lose her son and have no one to take care of her. Jiang Pingji's voice was like the sound of heaven to the salted fish lucky guy's ears. What do you think? Wei Xi took 2 steps back and bowed. It's all up to you, my lord. The salted fish lucky guy heaved a sigh of relief. His eyes were as red as a rabbit's, inexplicably weakening his fierce temperament. Jiang Pingji said, I'll keep an eye on him. Zixiao, go and investigate. Let me know the results. Wei Xi disagreed. This person is a robber after all. What he does is murder and robbery. How can my lord be with him? Jiang Pingji smiled. If he had the ability to hurt me, he wouldn't just be a robber. After Wei Xi walked a few steps away, the salted fish lucky guy's expression instantly brightened. He lowered his voice and said, Streamer, you're amazing. She thought Wei Xi was a soft and cute scholar. She didn't expect to meet him face to face, only to find out that she was intimidated by Wei Xi's aura. Jiang Pingji said, You don't have to worry about your safety in the few hours you stay here. It was fine in the past. After all, the salted fish were far away from her. But now she was right under her nose, and they were near the battlefield of the 2 armies. If he left her to wander outside alone, who knew if she could survive for more than 12 hours? He should at least take care of her a little. It was just a short sentence, but the salted fish European king felt extremely comfortable and safe. Streamer, you're so nice. You're a good person. Her eyes were red as she said, If it weren't for Beauty Ci, I would really want to hug you. Jiang Pingji said coldly, You can't hug me when he's not here. Why? Ugly reject. Salted fish lucky king. Ing. While they were talking, Wei Xi walked over in a hurry, seeming to have lost his composure. In his hands were a few pieces of fine silk cloth. "Master, look." Wei Xi handed the cloth to Jiang Pingji. She took it and unfolded it. She frowned slightly. On it was a drawing of the woodworking workshop's top secret. She gestured at salted fish with her peripheral vision and asked Wei Xi, "Shi Zhong?" Wei Xi shook his head. This person is definitely not Shi Zhong. He didn't have much interaction with Shi Zhong in his previous life, but he had met him twice in a hurry. If salted fish European king's body was really Shi Zhong's, there was no reason that Wei Xi couldn't recognize him the first time they met. In that case, the refugee he robbed last night was Shi Zhong? Jiang Pingji suddenly didn't know whether to laugh or cry. "The possibility of this guess is very high," Wei Xi said calmly. Shi Zhong didn't have such experience in the past. Zhangjiang Pass is located at the border between the two countries. The atmosphere is chaotic and bandits are everywhere. He avoided detection and tried to cross the mountain. It's hard to guarantee that he won't encounter bandits who block the road and rob him. In the previous life and this life, everyone's fate had changed greatly. Shi Zhong was still as unlucky as ever. Jiang Pingji said, "Send someone to search the mountain. I want to see him alive or dead." Regardless of whether Shi Zhong was truly loyal to her, he had worked under her for a few years. Wasn't it a betrayal to betray his master now? She could tolerate the shortcomings of her subordinates, but she couldn't tolerate her subordinates betraying her. Traitors had to die. "It's best if he's alive. I'll kill him myself." Salted fish European king interrupted and asked her, "What if he's dead?" "Whip the corpse." You have a heavy taste." Wei Xi's face darkened and he scolded, "Don't be rude." Salted fish European king immediately became as quiet as a quail. She didn't even dare to look around. The real beauty Ci was very different from the gentle gentleman she imagined. She felt pressured. Jiang Pingji heard her ridicule and laughed. "Do you know? This is the difference between the original and my peers." Incisive, salted fish gave Jiang Pingji a thumbs up. Human nature was complicated. People would show different faces to different people. Wei Xi was no exception. To friends he was talkative and considerate. To outsiders, he was elegant and dignified. To his lord, he was loyal and devoted. To those who offended his lord, he naturally had a stern and angry side. The Wei Xi in salted fish's mind was based on the Wei Xi she saw in the streaming room. Naturally, it was different from reality. Wei Xi sent someone to search for Shi Zhong's corpse, but after searching the mountain, they only found a pool of blood and drops of blood scattered intermittently along the way. Shi Zhong wasn't hacked to death last night. After waking up, he hastily treated his wounds and left. Looking at the time, he's most likely at the Nye camp. Wei Xi said, "When I sent people to search the mountain, the soldiers reported that there were obvious footprints nearby. The number of people was between 15 to 20. This group of people seemed to be looking for something, but they returned home when they couldn't find it. I boldly guessed that this group of people was led here by Shi Zhong? Most likely so." Jiang Pingji silently calculated the time in her heart and roughly reconstructed the process. The bandits slashed Shi Zhong randomly and thought that he was dead. In a hurry, they ran and fell down the mountain. In fact, Shi Zhong only fainted. When Shi Zhong woke up, he knew that he couldn't snatch the things from the bandits alone. He could only continue to climb the mountain and seek refuge in the Nye camp. Then, he would bring people to look for the bandits. Unexpectedly, the bandits were transmigrated by Lucky King. Lucky King mistakenly thought that the stolen things belonged to the bandits and brought them down the mountain. If Lucky King didn't transmigrate or didn't take the things, these things would have been taken back by Shi Zhong. This speculation made sense. Jiang Pingji smiled and said, "In that case, this bandit did a good deed?" Salted Lucky King rushed to say, "Does this count as me atoning for my crime?" Wei Xi was non-committal. Jiang Pingji took the opportunity to ask, "You can say so. Do you have any wishes?" Salted Lucky King's nerves were tense, and she suppressed her wildly beating heart. She had to think carefully about what she wanted. There was only one chance, so she couldn't make a hasty decision. After thinking about it, Salted Lucky King realized that she was also a greedy person. She actually wanted everything. In the end, she asked for everyone's autographs. Jiang Pingji took the initiative to give her a set of fashionable headwear for women. I saw the bullet screen earlier. You seem to have mentioned that you're getting married soon. This is my gift. Salted Lucky King was stunned on the spot. Her cheeks were fluttering red. You're tuning in to the Li Mei's Sword of Destiny YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support. And don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.